Chapter 15 of In the Heart of the Rockies by G.A. Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Alan Camerer. Chapter 15, The Colorado. Well, boys, Harry Wade began after they had smoked for some time in silence, we have got to look at this matter squarely. So far we have got out of a mighty tight place better than we expected. Yesterday it seemed to us that there weren't much chance of our carrying our hair away, but now we are out of that scrape, but we are in another pretty nigh as bad, though there ain't much chance of the redskins getting at us. That air so, Harry. We are in a pretty tight hole, you bet. They ain't likely to get our scalps for some time, but there ain't no denying that our chance of carrying them off is doggone small. You bet there ain't, Jerry, Sam Hicks said. Them pies and varmint will camp outside here, for they know that they have got us in a trap. They mayn't attack us at present, but we have got to watch night and day. Any dark night they may take it into their heads to come up, and there won't be nothing to prevent them, for the rustling of the stream among the rocks would cover any little noise they might make. The first we should know of it would be the yell of the varmint at the foot of this barrier, and afore we could get to the top, the two on guard would be tomahawked, and they would be down on us like a pack of wolves. I would almost as soon put down my rifle and walk straight out now and let them shoot me, if I knew they would do it, without any of their devilish tortures, as go on night after night, expecting to be woke up with their war yell in my ears. Of course they will always be keeping a watch there at the mouth of the canyon. A couple of boys are enough for that, for they will know that if we ride out on our horses we must go right up the valley, and it is a nasty place to gallop through in the dark. Besides, some of them will no doubt be placed higher up to cut us off, and if we got through, which ain't likely, they could ride us down in a few hours. If we crept out on foot and got fairly among the trees, we should be no better off, for they would take up our trail in the morning and hunt us down. I tell you fairly, boys, I don't see any way out of it. I reckon it will come to our having to ride out together, and to wipe out as many of the Utes as possible afore we go down. What do you say, Chief? Leaping Horse agrees with his white brother, Straight Harry, whose mind he knows. Well, go on then, Harry, Sam said. I thought that you had made an end of it, or I wouldn't have opened out. I don't see no way out of it at present, but if you do, I am ready to fall in with whatever it is. I see but one way out of it, boys. It is a mighty risky thing, but it can't be more risky than stopping here, and there is just a chance. I spoke to the chief last night, and he owned that it didn't seem to him there was a chance in that or any other way. However, he said that if I went, he would go with me. My proposal is this, that we take to the river and try and get through the canyons. There was a deep silence among the men. The proposal took them by surprise. No man had ever accomplished the journey, though two parties similarly attacked by Indians had attempted to raft down some of the canyons higher up. One party perished to a man. One survivor of the other party escaped to tell the tale, but as to the canyons below, through which they would have to pass, no man had ever explored them. The Indians regarded the river with deep awe, and believed the canyons to be peopled with demons. The enterprise was so stupendous, and the dangers to be met with so terrible, that ready as the Western hunters were to encounter dangers, no one had ever attempted to investigate the windings and turnings of the river that for 2,000 miles made its way through terrific precipices, and ran its course some 3,000 feet below the surrounding country until it emerged onto the plains of Mexico. That was why I was so anxious to reach the river, Harry went on after a pause. I wanted to see whether there were some trees by which we could construct a raft near its bank. Had there not been, I should have proposed to follow it up or down as far as we could make our way, in hopes of lighting on some trees. However, as it is, they are just handy for us. I don't say as we shall get through, boys, but there is just a chance of it. I don't see any other plan that would give us a show. Jerry was the first to speak. Well, Harry, you can count me in. One might as well be drowned in a rapid or carried over a fall as killed, or worse, taken and tortured by the redskins. That is so, Jerry, Sam Hicks agreed, while Ben said, Well, if we get through, it will be something to talk about all our lives. In course, there ain't no taking the horses. That is out of the question, Ben. We shall not have much time to spare, for the Utes may take it into their heads to attack us any night. And, besides, we have no means of making a big raft. We might tie 2 or 3 trunks together with the lariats and spike a few cross pieces on them. We might even make 2 such rafts, that is the outside. They will carry us and our stores, but as for the horses, we must either leave them down in the hollow for the Indians to find, or put a bullet through their heads. I expect the latter will be the best thing for them, poor beasts. No want trees, the chief said. Got horses' skins. Make canoes. You're right, Chief, Harry exclaimed. I never thought of that. That would be the very thing. Canoes will go down the rapids where the strongest rafts would be dashed to pieces, and if we come to a bad fall, we can make a ship to carry them around. The others were no less pleased with the suggestion, and the doubtful expression of their faces as they assented to the scheme now changed to one of hopefulness, and they discussed the plan eagerly. It was agreed that not a moment should be lost in setting to work to carry it out, and that they should forthwith retreat to the mouth of the lower canyon, for all entertained a secret misgiving that the Utes might make their attack that night, and felt that if that attack were made in earnest it would succeed. It was certain they would be able to find some point at which the lower gorge could be held, and at any rate a day would be gained, for at whatever hour of the night the Indians came up, they would not venture farther until daybreak, and there would probably be a long palaver before they would enter the lower canyon. Tom had not spoken. He recognized the justice of Harry's reasoning, but had difficulty in keeping his tears back at the thought of his horse being killed. For well nigh a year it had carried him well. He had tended and cared for it. It would come to his call and rub its muzzle against his cheek. He thought that had he been alone he would have risked anything rather than part with it. Don't you like the plan, Tom? Harry said to him as, having packed and saddled the horses, they rode together down the canyon. I don't suppose the passage is so terrible after all. I'm not thinking of the passage at all, Uncle, Tom said almost indignantly. It will be a grand piece of adventure, but I hate the thought of my horse being killed. It is like killing a dear friend to save oneself. It is a wrench, lad, Harry said kindly. I can quite understand your feelings, and I don't like the thought myself, but I see that it has got to be done, and after all it will be better to kill the poor brutes than to let them fall into the hands of the Indians, who don't know what mercy to their beasts means, and will ride them till they drop dead without the least compunction. I know it is better, Uncle, ever so much better, but it is horrible all the same. Anyhow, don't ask me to do it, for I could not. I will see to that, Tom. You shall be one of the guards of the canyon. You would not be of much use in making the canoes, and you won't have to know anything about it till you go down and get on board. Tom nodded his thanks. His heart was too full for him to speak, and he felt that if he said a word he should break down altogether. They rode rapidly along, passed through the little valley where the bear had been killed, without stopping, and went down the lower canyon, carefully examining it to fix upon the most suitable point for defense. There had been no recent fall, and though at some points great boulders lay thickly, there was no one place that offered special facilities for defense. Look here, boys, Harry said, reining up his horse at a point within 200 yards of the lower end. We can't do better than fix ourselves here. An hour's work will get up a wall that will puzzle the redskins to get over, and there is the advantage that a shot fired here by the guard will bring our whole force up in a couple of minutes. I vote we ride the horses down to the river and let them pick up what they can, and then come back here and build the wall. It will be getting dark in an hour's time, and we may as well finish that job at once. Ben and Sam, you may as well pick out a couple of young fir trees and bring them down at once. Then there will be no time lost. 5 of us will be enough for the wall. Keep your eyes open. Likely enough there is a bear or 2 about, and it would be a great thing for us to lay in a stock of meat before we start. As soon as they issued from the gorge, the horses were unsaddled and the stores taken off the pack animals. As they were doing this, Harry said a few words in a low tone to Sam. He then carefully examined the trees and picked out 2 young firs. Sam and Ben took their axes, and the other 5 went up the gorge again, and were soon hard at work collecting boulders and piling them in a wall. "There is a gun, Uncle," Tom exclaimed presently. "Well, I hope they have got sight of a bear. We shall want a stock of meat badly." A dozen shots were fired, but Tom thought no more of it as he proceeded with his work. The bottom of the canyon was but 15 feet wide, and by the time it was dark they had a solid wall across it nearly 6 feet high, with places for them to stand on to fire over. "Now then, Tom, you may as well take post here at once. I will send Sam or Ben up to watch with you. I don't think there is a shadow of chance of their coming tonight, but there is never any answering for redskins. I would leave Hunting Dog with you, but we shall want him to help make the framework for the canoes. The Indians are a deal handier than we are in making lashings. I will send your supper up here, lad, and your buffalo robes. Then you can take it by turns to watch and sleep. I reckon we shall be at work all night. We have got to get the job finished as quick as we can." A quarter of an hour later, Sam Hicks came up. "Have you got the trees down, Sam?" "Lord bless you, it didn't take a minute to do that. We got them down and split them up, then lit a fire and got the meat over it and the kettle, and mixed the dough." "Did you kill another bear? We heard you firing." "No, the critter was too high up, and I ain't much good at shooting. Perhaps they will get sight of him tomorrow, and Harry and the chief will bring him down if he is within range of their shooting irons. It is tarnal dark up here." In 20 minutes 2 lights were seen approaching, and Harry and Hunting Dog came up carrying pine wood torches. Each had a great faggot of wood fastened on his back, and Harry also carried the frying pan, on which were a pile of meat and 2 great hunks of bread, while Hunting Dog brought 2 tin pannikins of hot tea. "That will make it more cheerful for you," Harry said as he unfastened the rope that tied the faggot to his shoulders. "Now, Hunting Dog, get a good fire as soon as you can, and then come down again to us." The fire was soon blazing merrily, and Tom and Sam sat down to enjoy their meal. "Don't you think one of us ought to keep watch, Sam?" "Not a bit of it," Sam said. "The redskins will never dare to enter that canyon until after dark, and if they started now and made their way straight on, they would not be here for another 3 or 4 hours. I would bet my boots they don't come at all tonight. Even if they were not scared at us, they would be scared at coming near the river in the dark. No, we will just take our meal comfortable and smoke a pipe, and then I will take first watch and you shall take a sleep. We ain't closed an eye since the night before last." Tom indeed was nearly asleep before he had finished his pipe, and felt that he really must get a nap. So saying to Sam, "Be sure and wake me in 2 hours," he rolled himself in his robe and instantly fell asleep. It seemed to him that he had only just gone off when Sam roused him. He leapt to his feet, however, rifle in hand. "Anything the matter, Sam?" "Everything quiet," the miner replied. "What did you wake me for, then? I have not been asleep 5 minutes." "Well, according to my reckoning, mate, you have been asleep better than 5 hours. It was about 8:30 when you went off, and I reckon it is 2 now, and will begin to get light in another hour. I would not have waked you till daybreak, but I found myself dropping off." "I am awfully sorry," Tom began. "Don't you trouble, young'un. By the time you have been as long in the West as I have, you won't think anything of 2 nights' watch. Now you keep a sharp lookout. I don't think there is much chance of their coming, but I don't want to be woke up with a redskin coming right down on the top of me." "I see you have let the fire out, Sam," Tom said with a little shiver. "I put it out hours ago," Sam said as he prepared to lie down. "It would never have done to keep it all night, for a redskin would see my head over the top of the wall, while I should not get a sight of him till he was within arm's length." Tom took up his post and gazed earnestly into the darkness beyond the wall. He felt that his sense of vision would be no use whatever, and therefore threw all his faculties into that of listening. Slight as was the chance of the Indians' coming, he yet felt somewhat nervous, and it was a satisfaction to him to see beyond the mouth of the canyon the glow of the fire, by which, as he knew, the others were hard at work. In an hour the morning began to break, and as soon as he could see well up the canyon, he relighted the fire, jumping up to take a look over the wall every minute or so. It was not long before he saw his uncle approaching with a kettle. I saw your smoke, Tom, and guessed that you would be glad of a mug of hot tea. You have seen no signs of Indians, I suppose." "We have heard nothing, uncle. As to seeing, up to half an hour ago there was no possibility of making out anything, but I have not even been listening. Sam went on guard directly we had finished supper, and I asked him to call me in 2 hours, but he did not wake me until 2 o'clock." "He's a good fellow," Harry said. "Well, don't wake him now. I can't leave you the kettle, for we have to keep boiling water going, but you can put his tin into the ashes and warm it up when he wakes. Here are a couple of pieces of bread." "Why do you have to keep the kettle boiling, uncle?" "To bend the wood with. The piece we are working on is kept damp with boiling water. We hold it for a time over the fire, pouring a little water on it as fast as it evaporates. That softens the wood, and we can bend it much more evenly than we could if we did it by force. Besides, when it is fastened into its position, it remains, when it is dry, in that shape, and throws no strain onto anything." "Are you getting on well?" "Capitally. We should have done both the frames by now, but we were obliged to make them very strong so as to resist the bumps they are sure to get against the rocks. When they are finished, you might almost let them drop off the top of a house, they will be so strong and elastic. If the Indians will but give us time, we shall make a first-rate job of them." 3 hours later, Harry came up again with the kettle and some cooked meat. Sam had just woke up, and was quite angry with Tom for not rousing him before. "The others have been working all night," he said, "and here I have been asleep for 5 hours. A nice sort of mate they will think me." "Well, but you were watching 5 hours, Sam, and I would a deal rather work all night than stand here for 2 hours in the dark, wondering all the time whether the Indians are crawling up, and expecting at any moment to hear a rush against the wall." "I am going to take your place, Sam, when you have finished your breakfast," Harry said, as he came up. "If the Utes found out last night that we had gone, their scouts may be coming down before long. My rifle shoots a bit straighter than yours does." "It ain't the rifle, Harry," Sam said good-temperedly. "It is the eye that is wrong, not the shooting iron. I never had much practice with these long guns, but when it comes to a six-shooter, I reckon I can do my share as well as most. But they won't give me a chance with it." "I hope they won't, Sam. I'm sure they won't as long as there is light, and I hope that before it gets dark they will conclude to leave us alone." A vigilant watch was kept now. "I think I saw a head look out from that corner," Tom exclaimed suddenly, 2 hours after Sam had left them. "I am quite sure I did, Tom. We must wait until he shows himself a bit more. I reckon it is a good 300 yards off, and a man's head is a precious small mark at that distance. Stand a bit higher and lay your rifle on the wall. Don't fire if he only puts his head out. They know we can shoot, so there is not any occasion to give them another lesson. I don't hold to killing unless you have got to do it. Let him have a good look at us. When he goes back and tells the tribe that there is a 300-yard straight passage without shelter, and a strong wall across the end of it, and 2 white men with rifles ready to shoot, I reckon they will know a good deal better than to try to come up it, as long as there is light. Besides, they won't think there is any occasion to hurry, for they won't count on our taking to the river, and will know that we shall be keeping watch at night. So it may very well be that they will reckon on wearing us out, and that we may not hear of them for a week. There is the fellow's head again." The head remained visible round the corner of the rock for 2 or 3 minutes. "He knows all about it now, Tom. You won't see any more of him today. I will go down and lend them a hand below." Tom asked no questions about the horses. He had thought of them a score of times as he stood on guard, and the thought had occurred to him that it was possible the shots he had heard while they were building the wall on the previous afternoon had been the death shots of the horses. It did not occur to him when Sam was telling the story about the bear that this was a got-up tale, but when he came to think it over, he thought it probable that it was so. Sam himself was not much of a shot, but Ben, although inferior to Harry or either of the 2 Indians, shot as well as Jerry, and would hardly have missed a bear 3 or 4 times running. Each time the thought of the horses occurred to him, he resolutely put it aside and concentrated his mind upon the probable perils of the passage down the canyons and the wonderful gorges they would traverse. and the adventures and excitement they were sure to pass through. He thought how fortunate it was that they had taken the precaution of sending their specimens of quartz back to the fort, for were they in the canoes, the fruits of the journey would be irrevocably lost were these to upset. For now the Indians had twice discovered the presence of whites in the valley. They would be sure to watch it closely, and it would not be possible to go up to the mine again unless in strong force. The day passed quietly. Harry brought up Tom's meals, and late in the afternoon all hands came up, and the wall of stones was raised 4 feet, making it almost impregnable against a sudden attack. The two Indians took post there with Tom, and watched alternately all night. The Utes, however, remained perfectly quiet. They probably felt sure that the fugitives must sooner or later be forced to surrender, and were disinclined to face the loss that must occur before so strong a position, defended by 7 men armed with rifles and revolvers, could be carried. At 3 o'clock on the following afternoon, Hunting Dog came up. "Tom go down and get dinner," he said. "Hunting Dog will watch." Tom took his rifle and started down the canyon. "Come on, lad," his uncle shouted. "We are pretty near ready for a start, and have all had our dinner, so be quick about it. We want to get well away from here before night." Tom went to the fire and ate his meal. As he sat down, he saw that the stores, blankets, and robes had all been carried away. When he finished, his uncle led him down to the river. 2 canoes were floating in the water, and the other men were standing beside them. "There, Tom, what do you think of them?" "They are splendid, Uncle. It seems impossible that you could have built them in 2 days." "5 hands can do a lot of canoe building in 48 hours' work, Tom." The canoes were indeed models of strength, if not of beauty. They were each about 20 feet long and 5 feet wide. 2 strong pieces of pine 2 inches square ran along the top of each side, and one of the same width but an inch deeper formed the keel. The ribs, an inch wide and 3/4 of an inch thick, were placed at intervals of 18 inches apart. The canoes were almost flat-bottomed. The ribs lay across the keel, which was cut away to allow them to lie flush in it, a strong nail being driven at the point of junction, these being the only nails used in the boat's construction. The ribs ran straight out to almost the full width of the canoe, and were then turned sharp up, the ends being lashed with thongs of hide to the upper stringers. Outside the ribs were lashed longitudinal wattles of tough wood about an inch wide. They were placed an inch apart, extending over the bottom and halfway up the side. Over all was stretched the skin, 5 horses' hides having been used for each boat. They were very strongly sewed together by a double row of thongs, the overlaps having, before being sewed, been smeared with melted fat. Cross pieces of wood at the top kept the upper framework in its place. The hair of the skin was outward. The inner glistened with the fat that had been rubbed into it. "They are strong indeed," Tom said. "They ought to stand anything, Uncle." "Yes, I think they would stand a blow against any rock if it hadn't a cutting edge. They would just bound off as a basket would. Of course they are very heavy for canoes, but as they won't have to carry more than the weight of 4 men each, they will draw little over a couple of inches or so of water. That is why we made them so wide. We could not get strength without weight, and as there is no saying what shallows there may be, and how close in some places rocks may come up to the surface, we were obliged to build them wide to get light draught. You see, we have made 10 paddles so as to have a spare 1 or 2 in case of breakage. We have 2 spare hides, so that we shall have the means of repairing damages." Tom said nothing about the horses. Manufactured into a boat, as the skins were, there was not much to remind him of them. But he pressed his uncle's hand and said, "Thank you very much, Uncle. I don't mind so much now, but I should not like to have seen them before." "That is all right, Tom. It was a case of necessity. Sam and Ben shot them directly we got here." The stores were all laid by the boats, being divided between them, so that the cargoes were in all respects duplicates of each other. Before Tom came down, some had already been placed in each boat, with a blanket thrown over them. "You've got the gold, I suppose, Uncle?" "You may bet that we did not leave that behind. There is half in each boat, and the bags are lashed to the timbers so that if there is an upset they cannot get lost. How are we going? We have settled that you and I and the 2 Indians shall go together, and the rest in the other boat. The Indians know nothing of canoeing and won't be of very much use. I know you were accustomed to boats, and I did some rowing when I was a young man. I wish we had a couple of Canadian Indians with us, or of half-breeds. They are up to this sort of work, and with one in the stern of each canoe it would be a much less risky business going down the rapids. However, no doubt we shall get handy with the paddles before long." When everything was ready, Harry fired his rifle, and in a couple of minutes Hunting Dog came running down. The others had already taken their seats. He stepped into Harry's boat, and they at once pushed off. The river was running smoothly here, and Harry said, "Directly we get down a little way, we will turn the boat's head upstream and practice for a bit. It would never do to get down into rough water before we can use the paddles fairly." Tom sat in the bow of his boat. Hunting Dog was next to him. Then came the chief, and Harry sat in the stern. A paddle is a much easier implement to manage for a beginner than is an oar, and it was not long before they found that they could propel the boats at a fair rate. In a short time they had passed the end of the shelf at the mouth of the canyon, and the cliffs on that side rose as abruptly as they did on the other. The river was some 80 yards wide. "We will turn here," Harry said, "and paddle up. We shan't do more than keep abreast of these rocks now, for the stream runs fast, though it is so smooth." They found, indeed, that they had to work hard to hold their position. "Now, Tom," Harry sang out, "it is you and I do the steering, you know. When you want the head to go to the right, you must work your paddle out from the boat. When you want to go to the left, you must dip it in the water rather farther out and draw it towards the boat. Of course, when you've got the paddle the other side, you must do just the contrary. You must sing out right or left according as you see rocks ahead, and I shall steer with my paddle behind. I have a good deal more power over the boat than you have, and you must depend upon me for the steering, unless there is occasion for a smart swerve." At first the 2 boats shot backwards and forwards across the stream in a very erratic way, but after an hour's practice the steersman found the amount of force required. An hour later Harry thought that they were competent to make a start, and turning they shot rapidly past the cliffs. In a couple of miles there was a break in the rocks to the left. "We will land there," Harry said. "There are trees near the water and bushes farther up. We will make a camp there. There is no saying how far we may have to go before we get another opportunity. We have done with the Utes for good, and can get a sound night's sleep. If you, Chief, will start with Hunting Dog, as soon as we land, we will get the things ashore and light the fire. Maybe you will be able to get a bear for us." They did not trouble to haul up the canoes, but fastened them by the head ropes, which were made from lariats, to trees on the shore. Daylight was beginning to fade as they lighted the fire. No time was lost before mixing the dough, and it was in readiness by the time that there were sufficient glowing embers to stand the pot in. The kettle was filled and hung on a tripod over the fire. In a short time the Indians returned empty-handed. "No fine bear," the chief said. "Getting too dark to hunt. Tomorrow morning try." Harry got up and went to the boats, and returned directly with a joint of meat. Tom looked up in surprise. "It is not from yours, Tom," Jerry said as he saw him looking at it. "We took the hindquarters of the 4 pack ponies, but left the others alone. It was no use bringing more, for it would not keep." "So it is horse flesh." Tom rather shrank from the idea of eating it, and nothing would have induced him to touch it had he thought that it came from his own favorite. Some steaks were cut and placed in the frying pan, while strips were hung over the fire for those who preferred the meat in that way. Tom felt strongly inclined to refuse altogether, but when he saw that the others took their meat as a matter of course and proceeded to eat it with a good appetite, he did not like to do so. He hesitated, however, before tasting it, but Harry said with a laugh, "Fire away, Tom. You can hardly tell it from beef, and they say that in Paris lots of horse flesh is sold as beef." Thus encouraged, Tom took a mouthful, and found it by no means bad, for from their long stay in the valley the animals were all in excellent condition, and he acknowledged to himself that he would not have known the flesh from beef. "I call it mighty good for a change," Jerry said. "Out on the plains where one can get buffalo, one would not take horse for choice, but as we have been eating deer and bear meat for about a year, horse meat ain't bad by no means. What, you won't take another bit, Tom?" "Not tonight, Jerry. Next time I shall be all right. But it is my first trial, and though I can't say it is not good, it gives me a queer feeling, so I will stick to the bread." "Well, boys," Harry said presently, "we have made a first-rate start, and have got out of a big scrape, easier than I ever looked for. We could not have got two better canoes for our work if we had had them brought special from Canada, and it seems to me that they ought to go down pretty near anywhere without much damage. We shall get real handy with our paddles in 2 or 3 days, and I hope we shan't meet with any big rapids until we have got into the way of managing them well." "You bet, Harry. We have got out well," said Jerry. "I tell you it looked downright ugly, and I wouldn't have given a continental for our chances. As for the rapids, I guess we shall generally find rocks on one side or the other, or we can make our way along. And we can let down the canoes by the ropes. Anyhow, we need not get skeery over them. After getting out of that valley with our hair on, the thought of them does not trouble me a cent." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of In the Heart of the Rockies by G.A. Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by acamerer. Chapter 16. Afloat in Canoes. The two Indians were off long before daylight, and just as the others were having a wash at the edge of the river, they heard the crack of a rifle some distance up the cliff. "Bear!" Jerry exclaimed, "and I reckon they have got it, else we should have heard another shot directly afterwards. That'll set us up in food for some time. Get the fire made up, Tom. You won't have to eat horse steak for breakfast unless you like." The Indians returned half an hour later, laden with as much bear flesh as they could carry. "I vote we stop here for 2 days," Harry said. "We have got a lot of meat now, but it won't keep for 24 hours in this heat, so I vote we cut it up and dry it as the Indians do buffalo meat. It will keep any time. Besides, we deserve a couple of days' rest, and we can practice paddling while the meat dries. We got on very well yesterday, but I do not want us to get quite at home in the boats before we get to a bad bit." The proposal was agreed to, and as soon as breakfast was over, the whole of the meat was cut up into thin slices and hung up on cords fastened from tree to tree. "It ought to take 3 days to do it properly, and 4 is better," Harry said. "Still, as we have cut it very thin, I should think 2 days in this hot sun ought to be enough." "Are there any fish in the river, Uncle?" "I have no doubt there are, Tom, grists of them, but we have got no hooks." "Jerry has got some. He told me he never traveled without them, and we caught a lot of fish with them up in the mountains just after we started before. I don't know about line, but one might unravel one of the ropes." "I think you might do better than that, Tom. The next small animal we shoot, we might make some lines from the gut. They needn't be above 5 or 6 feet long. Beyond that, we could cut a strip of 30 or 40 feet long from one of the hides. However, we can do nothing at present in that way. Now let us get into the canoes and have a couple of hours paddling. After dinner we will have another good spell at the work." By evening there was a marked improvement in the paddling over that of the previous day, and after having had another day's practice, all felt confident that they should get on very well. By nightfall on the second day, the meat was found to be thoroughly dried, and was taken down and packed in bundles, and the next morning they started as soon as it was light. It was agreed that the boats should follow each other at a distance of 100 yards, so that the leader could signal to the one behind if serious difficulties were made out ahead, and so enable it to row to the bank in time. Were both drawn together into the suck of a dangerous rapid, they might find themselves without either boats or stores, whereas if only one of the boats was broken up, there would be the other to fall back upon. Harry's boat was to take the lead on the first day, and Tom, as he knelt in the bows, felt his heart beat with excitement at the thought of the unknown that lay before them, and that they were about to make their way down passes probably unpenetrated by man. Passing between what had seemed to them the entrance to a narrow canyon, they were surprised to find the river widen out. On their right, a great sweep of hills bent round like a vast amphitheater, the resemblance being heightened by the ledges running in regular lines along it, the cliff being far from perpendicular. "I should think one could climb up there," Tom said, half turning round to his uncle. "It looks like it, Tom, but there is no saying. Some of those steps may be a good deal steeper than they look. However, I have no doubt one could find places where it would be possible to climb if there were any use in doing so, but as we should only find ourselves up on bad lands, we should gain nothing by it." "I don't mean we should want to climb up now, Uncle, but it seemed a sort of satisfaction to know that there are places where one could climb in case we got the boat smashed up. If we had to make our way up, lad, it would be much better to go by one of the lateral canyons like the one we came down by. I can see at least half a dozen of them going up there. We should certainly find water, and we might find game, but up on the plateau we should find neither one nor the other." On the left-hand bank of the river, the cliffs fell still farther back in wide terraces that rose one behind the other up to a perpendicular cliff half a mile back from the river. There was a shade of green here and there, and the chief pointed far up the hill and exclaimed, "Deer!" "That is good," Harry said. "There are sure to be more of these places, and I should think we are not likely to starve anyhow. We can't spare time to stop now. We want to have a long day's paddle to see what it is going to be like, and we have got meat enough for the present. If we happen to see a deer within rifle shot, so that we can get at him without much loss of time, we will stop, for after all, fresh meat is better eating than dry." "I should think it would be, Uncle. From the look of the stuff, I should think it would be quite as tough as shoe leather and tasteless." "It needs a set of sharp teeth, Tom, but if you are hard set, I have no doubt you will be able to get through it. And at any rate, it constitutes the chief food of the Indians between the Missouri and the Rockies." For the next 3 hours they paddled along on the quiet surface of the river. The other canoe had drawn up, since it was evident that here at least there was no reason why they should keep apart. "I didn't expect we should find it as quiet as this, Harry," Jerry Curtis said. "It is a regular water party, and I should not mind how long I was at it if it were all like this. We shall have rough water enough presently, Jerry, and I expect we shall look back on this as the pleasantest part of the trip. It seems to me that the hills close in more towards the end of this sweep. It has made a regular horseshoe." "I reckon it depends upon the nature of the rock," Ben put in. "That is it, you may be sure, Ben. Wherever it is soft rock, in time it crumbles away like this. Where it is hard, the weather don't affect it much, and we get straight cliffs. I expect it is there we shall find the rapids worst." "Well, we shall soon make a trial of them, I fancy. It looks like a wall ahead, but the road must go through somewhere." A quarter of an hour later, Harry said, "You had better drop back now, Jerry. There is the gap right ahead. If you see me hold up my paddle, you row ashore. When we come to a bad rapid, we had better all get out and make our way down on the rocks as far as we can to see what it is like. It will never do to go at it blind. Of course, we may find places where the water comes to the wall faces on both sides, and then there is nothing to do but to take our chance. But I don't propose to run any risks that I can avoid." There was a perceptible increase in the rate of the current as they neared the gorge, and when they came within a short distance of it, Harry gave the signal to the boat behind, and both canoes made for the shore. As they stepped out onto the rocks, the chief pointed to a ledge far above them. "There will be time for Hunting Dog to shoot a deer," he said, "while we go down to Sea Canyon." Tom in vain endeavored to make out the object at which the Indian was pointing. Hunting Dog had evidently noticed it before landing, and upon Harry giving a nod of assent, started off with his rifle. The others waited until Jerry and his companions joined them, and then started along the rocks that had fallen at the foot of the cliffs. They were soon able to obtain a far better view of the gorge than they had done from the canoe. The river ran for a bit in a smooth, glassy flood, but a short distance down it began to form into waves, and beyond that they could see a mass of white foam and breakers. They made their way along the rocks for nearly 2 miles. It seemed well nigh impossible to Tom that the boats could go down without being swamped, for the waves were 8 or 10 feet high, with steep sides capped with white. At last the gorge widened again, and although the cliff to the right rose perpendicularly, on the other side it became less steep and seemed lower down to assume the character as that above the gorge. "It looks pretty bad," Harry said, speaking for almost the first time since they had started. For the roar of the water against the rocks, echoed and re-echoed by the cliffs, rendered conversation an impossibility. It looks bad, but as far as I can see, there are no rocks that come up near the surface, and the canoes ought to go through the broken water safely enough. It is an all-fired, nasty-looking place, Jerry said. But I have heard men who had been to the north talk about rapids they had gone through, and from what they said about them, they must have been worse than this. We have got to keep as near the side as we can. The waves ain't as high there as they are in the middle, and we have got to keep the boat's head straight and to paddle all we know. If we do that, I reckon, the canoes will go through. They retraced their steps up the gorge. Hunting Dog was standing by the boat with the dead deer at his feet. Jerry picked it up. I had better take this, I reckon, Harry. You have got one man more than we have. And he and his two companions went on to their boat. Now what do you think, Tom? His uncle said. Can you trust your head to keep cool? It will need a lot of nerve, I can tell you, and if her head swerves in the slightest, she will swing round, and over she will go, and it would want some tall swimming to get out of that race. You paddle as well as the chief, better, I think, but the chief's nerves are like iron. He has not been practicing steering as you have, but as there seem to be no rocks about, that won't matter so much. I ought to be able to keep her straight, if you three paddle hard. It may need a turn of the paddle now and then in the bow, but that we can't tell. So it shall be just as you like, lad. If you think your nerves can stand it, you can take your usual place, but if you have doubts about it, it were best to let the chief go there. I think I could stand it, uncle, for I've been out in the wherries in some precious rough seas at Spithead. But I think it would be best for the chief to take my place this time, and then I shall see how I feel. Harry said a few words to the chief in his own language, and Leaping Horse, without a word, stepped into the bow, while Tom took the seat behind him. We shan't be long going down, Harry said. I reckon the stream is running 10 miles an hour, and as we shall be paddling, it will take us through in 10 minutes. We had all better sit farther aft, so as to take her bow right out of the water. She will go through it ever so much easier so. They shifted their seats until daylight could be seen under the keel a foot from the bow. I think that is about the right trim, Harry said. Now, paddle all. The boat shot off from the shore. A minute later it darted into the gorge, the Indians setting a long sweeping stroke. There were 2 or 3 long heaves, and then they dashed into the race. Tom held his breath at the first wall of water, but, buoyant and lightly laden as the canoe was, with fully a foot of free board, she rose like a feather over it, and darted down into the hollow beyond. Tom kept his eyes fixed on the back of the chief's head, clenched his teeth tightly, and paddled away with all his strength. He felt that were he to look round, he should turn giddy at the turmoil of water. Once or twice he was vaguely conscious of Harry's shouts, "Keep her head inshore," or "A little farther out." But like a man rowing a race, he heeded the words but little. His faculties were concentrated on his work, but he could see a slight swerve of the Indian's body when he was obeying an order. He was not conscious of any change of motion, either in the boat or in the water round, when Harry shouted, "Easy all!" And even then it was the chief's ceasing to paddle rather than Harry's shout which caused him to stop. Then he looked round and saw that the race was past, and that the canoe was floating in comparatively quiet water. "She is a daisy!" Harry shouted. "We could not do better if we had been all Canadian half-breeds, Chief. Now we had better set to and bail her out as quickly as we can." Tom now for the first time perceived that he was kneeling in water, and that the boat was nearly half full. Their tea pannikins had been laid by their sides in readiness, and Hunting Dog touched him and passed forward his tin and the chief's, both of which had been swept aft. The Seneca at once began to throw out the water, but Tom, for a minute or two, was unable to follow his example. He felt as weak as a child. A nervous quivering ran through his body, and his hand trembled so that he could not grasp the handle of the tin. "Feel bad, Tom?" his uncle asked cheerily from behind. "Brace up, lad. It was a pretty warm 10 minutes, and I am not surprised you feel it. Now it is over, and I'm a little shaky myself. I shall be all right presently, uncle." A look at the chief's back did more to steady Tom's nerves than his own efforts. While he himself was panting heavily and was bathed in perspiration, The chief's breath came so quietly that he could scarce see his shoulders rise and fall, as he bailed out the water with perfect unconcern. With an effort, the boy took hold of his dipper, and by the time the boat was empty, his nerves were gaining their steadiness, though his breath still came quickly. As he laid down his tin, he looked round. "Heap water," Hunting Dog said with a smile. "Run like herd of buffalo." The other boat lay 20 yards behind them, and was also engaged in bailing. "All right now, Tom?" "All right, Uncle, but it is lucky you put the chief in the bows. I should have made a mess of it, for from the time we got into the waves it seemed nothing but confusion, and though I heard your voice, I did not seem to understand what you said. It was a trial to the nerves, Tom, but we shall all get accustomed to it before we get through. Well, thank God we have made our first run safely. Now paddle on, and we will stop at the first likely place and have a meal." A mile farther they saw a pile of driftwood on the left bank, and Harry at once headed the canoe into it, and drawing the boat carefully alongside, they got out. A minute later the other canoe joined them. "Jehoshaphat, Harry!" Jerry exclaimed as he stepped out. "That was worse nor a cyclone. I would rather sit on the back of the worst kind of bucker than jump over those waves again. If we are going to have much of this, I should say let us find our way back and ask the Utes to finish us off." "It was a rough bit, Jerry, but it might have been a deal worse if there had been rocks in the stream. All we had to do was keep her straight and paddle." "And a pretty big all, too," Jerry grumbled. "I felt scared pretty nigh out of my wits, and the other two allow they were just as bad. I reckon we should never have gone through it, but as long as you kept on straight, there didn't seem any reason why we shouldn't. I tell you, I feel so shaky that if there were a grizzly 20 yards off, I am blamed if I could keep the muzzle of my rifle on it." Tom had been feeling a good deal ashamed of his nervousness, and was much relieved at hearing that these seasoned men had felt somewhat the same as he had done. "What do you say, boys?" Harry asked when breakfast had been cooked and eaten. "If we stop here for today? Likely enough we may get some game, and if not, it won't matter, for the deer will last us a couple of days." "You bet," Ben Gulston said. "I think we have had enough of the water for today. I don't feel quite sure now I ain't going round and round, but I don't think any of us will feel right till we have had a night's sleep. Besides, all the rugs and blankets are wet and want spreading out in the sun for a bit, and the flour will want overhauling." "That settles it, Ben. Let us get all the outfit out of the boats at once." After the things had been laid out to dry, the two Indians went off in search of game, but none of the others felt any inclination to move, and they spent the rest of the day lying about smoking and dozing. The Indians brought back a bighorn, and the next morning the canoes dropped down the stream again. For some miles the river flowed quietly along a wide valley. At the end of that time it made an abrupt turn and entered the heart of the mountains. As before, Harry's canoe went in advance. The canyon here was a deep, gloomy chasm, with almost perpendicular sides, and for some distance the river ran swiftly and smoothly. Then white water was seen ahead. So the two boats rowed into the rocks at the foot of the precipice, and the occupants proceeded to explore the pass ahead. It was of a different character to the last. Black rocks rose everywhere above the surface, and among these the river flowed with extraordinary force and rapidity, foaming and roaring. All agreed that it was madness to think of descending here, and that a portage was necessary. The contents of the boats were lifted out, and then one of them was carried down over the rocks by the united strength of the party. They had gone half a mile when they came to a spot where they could go no farther. As the water rushed along against the rock wall itself, some 50 yards further down, they could see that the ledge again began. "We must go and fetch the other boat," Harry shouted above the din of the water, "and let them down one by one. There is no other way to do it." The second boat was brought down, and another journey was made to bring down the stores. The lariats were then tied together. "Let us sit down and smoke a pipe before we do anything more," Jerry said. 3 times up and down them rocks is worse nor 30 miles on a level." All were glad to adopt this suggestion, and for half an hour they sat watching the rushing waters. As they did so, they discussed how they had better divide their forces, and agreed that Harry's boat should, as before, go down first. 3 men would be required to let the boat down, and it would need at least 4 to check the second boat when it came abreast of them. Although all felt certain that a single line of the plaited hide would be sufficient, they determined to use 2 lines to insure themselves against risk. I should let them run out fast at first, Jerry, only keeping enough strain on them to keep her head well upstream. Begin to check her gradually, and let her down only inch by inch. When you see we are close to the rocks, hold her there while we get her alongside, and don't let go till we lift her from the water. Directly we are out, fasten the ropes to the bow of your canoe, then launch her carefully. And whatever you do, don't let go of the rope. Launch her stern first, close to the wall, then 2 get in and get well towards the stern, while the other holds the rope until the last moment. Then those 2 in the boat must begin to paddle as hard as they can, while the last man jumps in and snatches up his paddle. Keep her head close to the wall, for if the current catches it and takes her round, she would capsize in a moment against those rocks. Paddle all you know. We shall haul in the rope as fast as you come down. When you come abreast, 2 of us will check her, and the others will be on the rocks to catch hold of her side as she swings in. The first canoe was launched stern foremost. The 4 men took their seats in her and began to paddle against the stream with all their strength, while Jerry and his companions let the lines run through their fingers. The boat glanced along by the side of the wall. The men above put on more and more strain, giving a turn of the ropes round a smooth, water-worn rock they had before picked out as suitable for the purpose. The water surged against the bow of the canoe, lifting it higher and higher as the full strain of the rope came upon it. The chief was kneeling in the stern, facing the rocks below, and as the canoe came abreast of them, he brought her in alongside. Harry held up his paddle, the men above gave another turn of the ropes round the rock, and the canoe remained stationary. Hunting Dog sprang out onto the rocks, and taking hold of the blade of the chief's paddle, brought the canoe in so close that the others were able to step ashore without difficulty. The baggage was taken out, and the canoe lifted from the water, turned upside down, and laid on the rocks. Harry held up his hand to show that they were ready, having before he did so chosen a stone round which to wind the lariats. The other boat was then launched. Sam and Ben took their places astern and began to paddle against the stream. As they were in the backwater below the ledge of rock, they were able to keep her stationary while Jerry took his place and got out his paddle. When all were ready, they paddled her out from the backwater. As soon as the current caught her, she flew past the cliff like an arrow. Although the 3 men were now paddling at the top of their speed, Harry and the chief pulled in the rope hand over hand, while Hunting Dog and Tom went a short way down the rocks. "Don't check her too suddenly, Chief," Harry shouted. "Let the rope run out easy at first, and bring the strain on gradually." "The ropes will hold," the chief said. "1 stop buffalo and gallop, 2 stop boat." "Yes, but you would pull the head out of the canoe, Chief, if you stopped her too suddenly." The chief nodded. He had not thought of that. In spite of the efforts of the oarsmen, the canoe's head was swerving across the stream just as she came abreast of them. A moment later she felt the check of the rope. "Easy, Chief, easy," Harry shouted, as the water shot up high over the bow of the canoe. "Wait till she gets a bit lower, or we shall capsize her." The check of the bow had caused the stern to swerve out, and when they again checked her, she was several lengths below them with her head inclined to shore. More and more strain was put on the ropes until they were as taut as iron bars. A moment later Tom and Hunting Dog seized 2 paddles held out to them, and the boat came gently in alongside. "Gosh," Ben exclaimed as he stepped ashore, "it has taken as much out of me as working a windlass for a day. I'm blamed if I did not think the whole boat was coming to pieces. I thought it was all over for us for sure, Harry. When she first felt the rope, the water came right in over the side. It was touch and go, Ben, but there was a rock just outside you, and if we had not checked her a bit, her head would have gone across it, and if it had, I would not have given a red cent for your lives." All day they toiled on foot, and by nightfall had made but 4 miles. Then they camped for the night among the rocks. The next 4 days were passed in similar labor. 2 or 3 times they had to cross the torrent in order to get on to fallen rocks on the other side, to that which they were following. These passages demanded the greatest caution. In each case there were rocks showing above water in the middle of the channel. One of these was chosen as most suited to their purpose, and by means of the ropes a canoe was sheered out to it. Its occupants then took their places on the rock, and in turn drop the other boat down to the next suitable point, the process being repeated step by step until the opposite bank was reached. At the end of the fourth day, the geological formation changed. The rock was softer and the stream had worn a more even path for itself, and they decided to take to the boats again. There was no occasion for paddling now. It was only when a swell on the surface marked some hidden danger below that a stroke or two of the paddle was needed to sweep them clear of it. For 4 hours they were carried along at the rate of fully 12 miles an hour, and at the end of that time they shot out from between the overhanging walls into a comparatively broad valley. With a shout of delight they headed the boats for shore and leapt out onto a flat rock a few inches above the water. "If we could go on at that pace right down, we should not be long before we were out of the mountains," Tom said. "We could do with a bit slower, Tom. That is too fast to be pleasant. Just about half that would do, 6 miles an hour. 12 hours a day would take us out of the canyons in a fortnight or so. We might do that safely, but we could not calculate on having such good luck as we have had today when going along at 12 miles an hour. The pace for the last 4 days has been just as much too slow as this is too fast. 4 miles a day, working from morning till night, is heartbreaking. In spite of our run today, we cannot have made much over 100 miles since we started. Well, there is one comfort. We are in no great hurry. We have got just the boats for the work, and so far as we can see, we are likely to find plenty of food. A job like this isn't to be reckoned child's play. So far I consider we have had good luck. I shall be well content if it averages as well all the way down. The fear is we may get to falls where we can neither carry nor let the boats down. In that case we should have to get out of the canyon somewhere, pack as much flour as we could carry, and make our way across country, though how far we might have to travel there is no knowing. I hope it mayn't come to that, but at any rate I would rather go through even worse places than that canyon above to have to quit the boats." "Right you are, Harry," Jerry agreed. "I would rather tote the canoe on my back all the way down to Mexico than to have to try and make my way over the Badlands to the hills. Besides, when we get a bit farther we shall be in the Navajo country, and the Utes ain't a circumstance to them. The Ute ain't much of a fighter anyway. He will kill white men he finds up in his hills, 'cause he don't want white men there. But he has to be 5 or 6 to 1 before he will attack him. The Navajo kills the white man 'cause he is a white man, and 'cause he likes killing. He is a fighter, and you don't forget it. If it had been Navajos instead of Utes that had caught us up in the hills, you may bet your bottom dollar our scalps would be drying in their lodges now." "That is so, Jerry," Ben put in. "Besides, the Navajos and the Apaches have got no fear of white men. They have been raiding Mexico for hundreds of years, and man to man they can whip Mexicans out of their boots. I don't say as they haven't a considerable respect for Western hunters. They have had a good many lessons that these can outshoot them and outfight them. Still, they ain't scared of them as plain Indians are. They are a bad lot. Look at them which way you will. And I don't want to have to tramp across their country no ways. It was pretty hard work carrying that boat among them rocks, but I would rather have to do so right down to the plains than get into a muss with the Navajos." "How far does the Navajo country come this way?" "There ain't no fence, Tom, I expect. They reckon as it's their country just as far as they like to come. They don't come up as far north as this, but where they ends and where the Utes begin no one knows but themselves. And I reckon it shifts according as the Navajos are busy with the Mexicans in the south, or have got a quiet spell, and take it into their heads to hunt this way." For many days they continued their journey, sometimes floating quietly along a comparatively wide valley, sometimes carrying their boats past dangerous rapids, sometimes rushing along at great speed on the black, deep water, occasionally meeting with falls where everything had to be taken out of the canoes, and the boats themselves allowed to shoot over the falls with long ropes attached, by which they were drawn to shore lower down. It was seldom that they were without meat, as several bighorns and 2 bears were shot by the Indians. They had no doubt that they could have caught fish, but as a rule they were too tired when they arrived at their halting place to do more than cook and eat their suppers before they laid down to rest. "I reckon it won't be very long before we come upon a Mexican village," Harry said one day, after they had been 6 weeks on their downward course. "I have heard there is one above the Grand Canyon." The scenery had varied greatly. In some of the valleys, groves of trees bordered the river. Sometimes not even a tuft of grass was to be seen. Occasionally the cliffs ran in an even line for many miles, showing that the country beyond was a level plateau. At other times rugged peaks and pinnacles resembling ruined castles, lighthouses, and churches could be seen. Frequently the cliffs rose 3,000 or 4,000 feet in an almost unbroken line, but more often there were rounded terraces, where it would have been easy to ascend to the upper level. Everywhere the various strata were of different colors, soft grays and browns, orange, vermilion, purple, green, and yellow. They soon learned that when they passed through soft strata, the river ran quietly. Where the rocks were hard, there were falls and rapids. Where the strata lay horizontal, the stream ran smoothly, though often with great rapidity. Where they dipped upstream, there were dangerous rapids and falls. Since the start, the river had been largely swollen by the junctions of other streams, and was much wider and deeper than it had been where they embarked. And even where the rapids were fiercest, they generally found comparatively quiet water close to the bank on one side or the other. Twice they had had upsets, both the boats having been capsized by striking upon rocks but an inch or two below the surface of the water. Little harm was done, for the guns and all other valuable articles were lashed to the sides of the boats, while strips of hide, zigzagged across the ends of the canoes at short distances apart, prevented the blankets and rugs and other bulky articles from dropping out when the boat capsized. Since the river had become wider and the dangers less frequent, the boats always kept near each other. Upsets were therefore only the occasion for a hearty laugh, for it took but a few minutes to right the canoe, bail it out, and proceed on their way. Occasionally they had unpleasant visitors at their camp, and altogether they killed 10 or 12 rattlesnakes. In some of the valleys they found the remains of the dwellings of a people far anterior to the present Indian races. Some of these ruins appeared to have been communal houses. At other points they saw cliff dwellings in the face of the rock, with rough sculptures and hieroglyphics. The canyons varied in length from 10 to 150 miles, the comparatively flat country between them varying equally in point of appearance and in the nature of the rocks. As they got lower, they once or twice saw roughly made rafts, composed of 3 or 4 logs of wood, showing where Indians had crossed the river. The journey so far had been much more pleasant than they had expected, for as the river grew wider, the dangers were fewer and farther apart, and more easily avoided, and they looked forward to the descent of the Grand Canyon, from which they knew they could not be far distant, without much fear that it would prove impracticable. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of In the Heart of the Rockies by G.A. Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by acamerer. Chapter 17, The Grand Canyon. Passing from a short canyon, the boats emerged into a valley with flat shores for some distance from the river. On the right was a wide side canyon, which might afford a passage up into the hills. Half a mile lower down there were trees and signs of cultivation, and a light smoke rose among them. At this, the first sign of human life they had seen since they took to the boats, all hands paddled rapidly. They were approaching the shore when Leaping Horse said to Harry, "No go close. Stop in river and see. Perhaps bad Indians. Leaping Horse not like smoke." Harry called to the other canoe, and they bore out into the stream again. The chief stood up in the boat, and after gazing at the shore silently for a moment said, "Village burnt. Burnt little time ago. Post still burning." As he resumed his seat, Harry stood up in turn. "That is so, chief. There have only been 5 or 6 huts. Whether Indian or white, one can't tell now." Just at this moment an Indian appeared on the bank. As his eye fell on the boats, he started. A moment later he raised a war yell. "Navajo," the chief said. "Navajo war party come down, kill people and burn village. Must row hard." The yell had been answered from the wood, and in 2 or 3 minutes as many score of Indians appeared on the banks. They shouted to the boats to come to shore, and as no attention was paid, some of them at once opened fire. The river was about a quarter of a mile wide, and although the shots splashed round them, the boats were not long in reaching the farther bank, but not unharmed, for Ben had dropped his paddle and fallen back in the boat. Is he badly hurt? Harry asked anxiously as the canoes drew alongside each other near the bank, and Sam turned round to look at his comrade. He has finished his journey, Sam said in a hoarse voice. He has gone down, and a better mate and a truer heart I never met. The ball has hit him in the middle of the forehead. It were to be, I guess, for it could only have been a chance shot at that distance. Exclamations of sorrow and fury broke from the others, and for a few minutes there was no thought of the Indians, whose bullets were still falling in the water, for the most part short of the boats. A sharp tap on the side of Harry's canoe, followed by a jet of water, roused them. We mustn't stop here, Harry said, as Hunting Dog plugged the hole with a piece of dried meat, or poor Ben won't be the only one. Let us have a shot first, Jerry said. Young Tom, do you take a shot with plumb center. It is about 450 yards as near as I can reckon, and she will carry pretty true that distance. We will give them a shot all round, Harry said as he took up his rifle. 6 shots were discharged almost at the same moment. One of the Indians was seen to fall. The rest bounded away to a short distance from the bank. Then Hunting Dog, at a word from the chief, stepped into the other canoe. Keeping close under the bank, they paddled down. The Indians had ceased firing and had disappeared at a run. What are they up to now, Chief? Going down to mouth of canyon. River sure to be narrow. Get there before us. Wait, Jerry, Harry shouted to the other boat, which was some 20 yards ahead. The chief thinks they have gone to cut us off at the head of the canyon, which is likely enough. I don't suppose it is 50 yards wide there, and they will riddle us if we try to get through in daylight. We had better stop and have a meal and talk it over. The boats were rowed ashore, and the men landed and proceeded to light a fire as unconcernedly as if no danger threatened them. Ben's death had cast a heavy gloom over them, and but few words were spoken until the meal was cooked and eaten. It is a doggone bad business, Jerry said. I don't say at night as we mayn't get past them without being hit, but to go rushing into one of those canyons in the dark would be as bad as standing their fire, if not worse. The question is, could we leave the boats and strike across? We would not strike across this side anyhow, Harry said. There are no settlements west of the Colorado. We know nothing of the country, and it is 100 to 1 we should all die of thirst, even if we could carry enough grub to last us. If we land at all, it must be on the other side, and then we could not reckon on striking a settlement short of 200 miles, and 200 miles across a country like this would be almost certain death. As the Navajos have ridden down, Harry, there must be water. I reckon they came down that canyon opposite. Navajo on track in morning, the chief said quietly. When they see we not go down river, look for boat. Find where we land and take up trail. Canyon very plain road. Some go up there straight. Take all our scalps. No one spoke for a moment or two. What the Seneca said was so evident to them that it was useless to argue. Well, Chief, what do you advise yourself? Harry asked at length. Not possible go on foot, Harry. Country all rocks and canyons. Cannot get through, cannot get water. Trouble with Navajos, too. Only chance, get down in boat tonight. Keep close under this bank. Perhaps Indians not see us, night dark. Do you think they can cross over to this side? Yes, got canoe. 2 canoes in village. Leaping Horse saw them on bank. When it gets dark, cross over. We will get a start of them, Harry said. Directly it is dark, we can be off too. The shore is everywhere higher than our heads as we sit in the canoes, and we can paddle in the shadow without being seen by them on the other side, while they won't venture to cross till it is pitch dark. As the stream runs something like 3 miles an hour, I reckon that they are hardly likely to catch us. As for the rapids, they don't often begin until you are some little distance in. At any rate, we shall not have to go far, for the redskins will not dare to enter the canyon, so we can tie up till morning as soon as we are a short distance in. We've got to run the gauntlet of their fire, but after all, that is better than taking our chances by leaving the boats. If we lie down when we get near them, they may not see us at all, but if they do, A very few strokes will send us past them. At any rate, there seems less risk in that plan than any other." The others agreed. "Now, boys, let us dig a grave," he went on as soon as the point was settled. "It is a sort of clay here, and we can manage it, and it is not likely we shall find any place when we are once in the canyon where we can do it." They had neither picks nor shovels with them, for their mining tools had been left at the spot where they were at work, but with their axes and knives they dug a shallow grave, laid Ben's body in it, covered it up, and then rolled a number of boulders over it. Ben's death affected Tom greatly. They had lived together and gone through many perils and risks for nearly a year, and none had shown more unflagging good humor throughout than the man who had been killed. That the boats might upset and all might perish together was a thought that had often occurred to him as they had made their way down the river, but that one should be cut off like this had never once been contemplated by him. Their lives from the hour they met on the Big Wind River had seemed bound up together, and this sudden loss of one of the party affected him greatly. The others went about their work silently and sadly, but they had been so accustomed to see life lost in sudden frays, and in one or other of the many dangers that miners and hunters are exposed to, that it did not affect them to the same extent as it did Tom. Except 2 or 3 men who remained on watch on the opposite bank, though carefully keeping out of rifle range, they saw no signs of the Navajos during the day. As soon as it became so dark that they were sure their movements could not be seen from the other side, they silently took their places in the boats and pushed off into the current. For a quarter of an hour they lay in the canoes, then at a signal from Harry knelt up, took their paddles, and began to row very quietly and cautiously, the necessity for dropping their paddles noiselessly into the water and for avoiding any splashing having been impressed on all before starting. "There's no occasion for haste," Harry said. "Long and gentle strokes of the paddle will take us down as fast as we need to go. If those fellows do cross over, as I expect they will find it difficult to travel over the rocks in the dark as fast as we are going now, and there is no fear whatever of their catching us if we go on steadily." After an hour's rowing they could make out a dark mass rising like a wall in front of them, and Harry passed the word back to the other canoe, which was just behind them, that they should now cease paddling, only giving a stroke occasionally to keep the head of the canoe straight, and to prevent the boat from drifting out from under the shelter of the bank. In the stillness of the night they could hear a low roaring, and knew that it was caused by a rapid in the canyon ahead. Higher and higher rose the wall of rock, blotting out the stars in front of them, till the darkness seemed to spread halfway over the sky. They could see that the boat was passing the shore more rapidly as the river accelerated its course before rushing into the gorge. Suddenly there was a shout on the right, so close that Tom was startled. Then there was a rifle shot, and a moment later a wild outburst of yells and a dozen other shots. At the first shout the paddles dipped into the water, and at racing speed the boat shot along. 8 or 10 more rifle shots were fired, each farther behind them. "Anyone hurt?" Harry asked. There was a general negative. "I don't believe they really saw us," Harry said. "The first fellow may have caught sight of us, but I expect the others fired merely at random. Now let us row in and fasten up, for judging from that roaring there must be a big rapid close ahead." The boats were soon fastened up against the rocks, and the chief stepped ashore, saying, "Leaping Horse and Hunting Dog will watch. Navajos may come down here. Don't think they will be brave enough to enter canyon, too dark to see. Still, better watch." "Just as you like, Chief," Harry said, "but I have no belief that they will come down here in the dark. It would be as much as they would dare to do in broad daylight. Besides, these rocks are steepish climbing anyway, and I should not like myself to try to get over them, when it is so dark that I can't see my own hand, except by putting it up between my eyes and the stars." "If it was not for that," Jerry said, "I would crawl along to the mouth and see if I couldn't get a shot at them varmint on the other side." "You would not find them there, Jerry. You may be sure that when they saw us go through they would know it was of no use waiting there any longer. They would flatter themselves that they had hit some of us, and even if they hadn't, it would not seem to matter a cent to them, as the evil spirit of the canyon would surely swallow us up. "Well, they have been wrong in their first supposition, Uncle," Tom said, "and I hope they will be equally wrong in the second." "I hope so, Tom. Now we may as well go to sleep. As soon as there is any light, we must explore as far as we can go, for by the noise ahead it must be either a fall or a desperately bad rapid." When daylight broke, the whites found Hunting Dog sitting with his rifle across his knees on a rock above them. "Where is the chief?" Harry asked him. "Leaping Horse went up to the rocks to see if Navajos have gone." "Very well. Tell him when he comes back we have gone down to have a look at the rapid. Tom, you may as well stay here. There is plenty of driftwood among those rocks, and we will breakfast before we start down. I reckon we shall not have much time for anything of that sort after we are once off." Tom was by no means sorry to be saved a heavy climb. He collected some wood and broke it up into suitable pieces, but at the suggestion of Hunting Dog, waited for the chief's return before lighting it. The chief came down in a few minutes. "Navajo's all gone," he said briefly. "Then I can light a fire, Chief?" Leaping Horse nodded, and Tom took out the tightly fitting tin box in which he kept his matches. Each of the party carried a box, and to secure against the possibility of the matches being injured by the water in case of a capsize, the boxes were kept in deer's bladders tightly tied at the mouth. The fire was just alight when the others returned. "It is better ahead than we expected," Harry said. "The noise was caused by the echo from the smooth faces of the rocks. It is lucky we hauled in here last night, for these rocks end 50 yards on, and as far as we can see down, the water washes the foot of the wall on both sides. We were able to climb up from them onto a narrow ledge, parallel with the water, and went on to the next turn, but there was no change in the character of the river, so we shall make a fair start anyway." More wood was put on the fire, and in a quarter of an hour the kettle was boiling and slices of meat cooked. Half an hour later they took their places in the canoes and started. The canyon was similar to the one they had last passed. The walls were steep and high, but with irregular shelves running along them. Above these were steep slopes running up to the foot of smooth perpendicular cliffs of limestone. The stream was very rapid, and they calculated that in the first half hour they must have run 6 miles. Here the walls receded to a distance. The ledges of rock and hills of considerable heights intervened between the river and the cliffs. They checked the pace of their canoes just as they reached this opening, for a deep roar told of danger ahead. Fortunately, there were rocks where they were able to disembark, and a short way below they found that a natural dam extended across the river. "There has been an eruption of trap here," Harry said, looking at the black rock on either side. "There has been a fissure, I suppose, and the lava was squeezed up through it. You see, the river has cut a path for itself some hundreds of feet deep. It must have taken countless ages, Tom, to have done the work." Over this dam the water flowed swiftly and smoothly, and then shot down in a fall 6 feet high. Below, for a distance of 200 or 300 yards, was a furious rapid, the water running among black rocks. With considerable difficulty they made a portage of the boats and stores to the lower end of the rapid. This transit occupied several hours, and they then proceeded on their way. 5 more miles were passed. Several times the boats were brought to the bank in order that falls ahead might be examined. These proved to be not too high to shoot, and the boats paddled over them. When they had first taken to the river, they would never have dreamt of shooting such falls, but they had now become so expert in the management of the boats, and so confident in their buoyancy, that the dangers which would then have appalled them were now faced without uneasiness. They now came to a long rapid, presenting so many dangers that they deemed it advisable to let down the boats by lines. Again embarking, they found that the wall of rocks closed in, and they entered a narrow gorge, through which the river ran with great swiftness, touching the walls on each side. Great care was needed to prevent the boats being dashed against the rock, but they succeeded in keeping them fairly in the middle of the stream. After traveling 4 miles through this gorge, it opened somewhat, and on one side was a strip of sand. "We will land there," Harry said. "It looks to me like granite ahead, and if it is, we are in for bad times sure." The boats were soon pulled up, and they proceeded to examine the cliffs below. Hitherto the danger had been in almost exact proportion to the hardness of the rock, and as they were entering a far harder rock than they had before encountered, greater difficulties than those they had surmounted were to be expected. They could not see a long distance down, but what they saw was enough to justify their worst anticipations. The canyon was narrower than any they had traversed, and the current extremely swift. There seemed but few broken rocks in the channel, but on either side the walls jutted out in sharp angles far into the river, with crags and pinnacles. "Well, it is of no use looking at it," Jerry said after a pause. "It is certain we can't get along the sides, so there is nothing to do but go straight at it, and the sooner it is over the better." Accordingly they returned to the boats, and soon darted at the speed of an arrow into the race. Bad as it was at starting, it speedily became worse. Ledges, pinnacles, and towers of rock rose above the surface of the stream, breaking it into falls and whirlpools. Every moment it seemed to Tom that the boat must inevitably be dashed to pieces against one of these obstructions, for the light boats were whirled about like a feather on the torrent, and the paddlers could do but little to guide their course. The very strength of the torrent, however, saved them from destruction, the whirl from the rocks sweeping the boat's head aside when within a few feet of them, and driving it past the danger before they had time to realize that they had escaped wreck. Half an hour of this, and a side canyon came in. Down this a vast quantity of boulders had been swept, forming a dam across the river, but they managed to paddle into an eddy at the side, and to make a portage of the boats to the water below the dam, over which there was a fall of from 30 to 40 feet high. 3 more similar dams were met with. Over one the canoes were carried, but on the others there was a break in the boulder wall, and they were able to shoot the falls. After 3 days of incessant labor, they heard, soon after starting from their last halting place, a roar even louder and more menacing than they had yet experienced. Cautiously they got as close as possible to the side, and paddling against the stream were able to effect a landing just above the rapid. On examining it, they found that it was nearly half a mile long, and in this distance the water made a fall of some 80 feet, the stream being broken everywhere with ledges and jagged rocks, among which the waves lashed themselves into a white foam. It seemed madness to attempt such a descent, and they agreed that at any rate they would halt for the day. The rocks through which the canyon ran were fully 1,000 feet high, but they decided that, great as the labor might be, it would be better to make a portage, if possible, rather than descend the cataract. "There is a gulch here running up onto the hill," Tom said. "Hunting Dog and I will start at once and see if it is possible to get up it, and if so, how far it is to a place where we can get down again." Harry assented. Leaping Horse, without a word, joined the explorers, and they set off up the gulch. It was found that the ravine was steep, but not too steep to climb. When they were nearly at the top, Hunting Dog pointed to the hillside above them, and they saw a bighorn standing at the edge of the rock. The 3 fired their rifles simultaneously, and the wild sheep made a spring into the air and then came tumbling down the side of the ravine. As fresh meat was beginning to run short, this was a stroke of good fortune, and after reloading their guns, they proceeded up the ravine until they reached the crest of the hill. The soil was disintegrated granite, and tufts of short grass grew here and there. After walking about a mile, parallel to the course of the river, they found that the ground descended again, and without much difficulty made their way down until they reached the foot of a little valley. Following this, they were soon standing by the side of the river. Above, its surface was as closely studded with rocks as was the upper cataract. Below, there was another fall that looked impracticable, except that it seemed possible to pass along on the rocks by the side. It was getting dark by the time they rejoined their comrades. "Your report is not a very cheerful one," Harry said, "but at any rate there seems nothing else to be done than to make the portage. The meat you have got for us will restock our larder, and as it is up there we shan't have the trouble of carrying it over." The next day was a laborious one. One by one the canoes were carried over, but the operation took them from daybreak till dark. The next morning another journey was made to bring over the rugs and stores, and they were able in addition to these to carry down the carcass of the sheep, after first skinning it and cutting off the head with its great horns. Nothing was done for the rest of the day beyond trying whether another portage could be made. This was found to be impracticable, and there was nothing for them but to attempt the descent. They breakfasted as soon as day broke, carried the boats down over the boulder dam with which the rapids commenced, and put them into the water. For some little distance they were able to let them down by ropes. Then the rocks at the foot of the cliffs came to an end. Fortunately, the 7 lariats furnished them with a considerable length of line, and in addition to these, the 2 Indians had on their way down plaited a considerable length of rope, with thongs cut from the skins of the animals they had killed. The total available amount of rope was now divided into 2 lengths, the ends being fastened to each canoe. One of the boats with its crew on board was lowered to a point where the men were able to get a foothold on the ledge. As soon as they had done so, the other boat dropped down to them, and the ropes were played out until they were in turn enabled to get a footing on a similar ledge or jutting rock, sometimes so narrow that but one man was able to stand. So alternately the boats were let down. Sometimes, when no foothold could be obtained on the rock wall, the pinnacles and ledges in the stream were utilized. All the work had to be done by gesture, for the thunder of the waters was so tremendous that the loudest shout could not be heard a few yards away. Hour passed after hour. Their progress was extremely slow, as each step had to be closely considered and carried out with the greatest care. At last a terrible accident happened. Harry, Leaping Horse, and Tom were on a ledge. Below them was a fall of 3 feet, and in the foaming stream below it rose several jagged rocks. Jerry's canoe was got safely down the fall, but in spite of the efforts of the rowers, was carried against the outer side of one of these rocks. They made a great effort to turn the boat's head into the eddy behind it, but as the line touched the rock, its sharp edge severed the rope like a knife, and the boat shot away down the rapid. Those on the ledge watched it with breathless anxiety. 2 or 3 dangers were safely passed. Then, to their horror, they saw the head of the canoe rise suddenly as it ran up a sunken ledge just under the water. An instant later the stern swept round, bringing her broadside on to the stream, and she at once capsized. "Quick!" Harry exclaimed. "We must go to their rescue. Keep close to the wall, Chief, till we see signs of them. It is safest close in." In an instant they were in their places, and as they released the canoe, she shot in a moment over the fall. For a short distance they kept her close to the side, but a projecting ledge threw the current sharply outwards, and the canoe shot out into the full force of the rapid. The chief knelt up in the bow, paddle in hand, keeping a vigilant eye for rocks and ledges ahead, and often with a sharp stroke of the paddle, seconded by the effort of Harry in the stern, sweeping her aside just when Tom thought her destruction inevitable. Now she went headlong down a fall, then was caught by an eddy, and was whirled round and round 3 or 4 times before the efforts of the paddlers could take her beyond its influence. Suddenly a cry came to their ears. Just as they approached a rocky ledge some 30 feet long, and showing a saw-like edge a foot above the water, the chief gave a shout and struck his paddle into the water. "Behind the rock, Tom, behind the rock!" Harry exclaimed as he swept the stern round. Tom paddled with all his might, and the canoe headed upstream. Quickly as the movement was done, the boat was some 12 yards below the rock as she came round with her nose just in the lower edge of the eddy behind it, while from either side the current closed in on her. Straining every nerve, the 3 paddlers worked as for life. At first Tom thought that the glancing waters would sweep her down, but inch by inch they gained, and drove the boat forward from the grasp of the current into the back eddy, until suddenly, as if released from a vice, she sprang forward. Never in his life had Tom exerted himself so greatly. His eyes were fixed on the rock in front of him, where Hunting Dog was clinging with one hand, while with the other he supported Jerry's head above the water. He gave a shout of joy as the chief swept the head of the canoe round, just as it touched the rock and laid her broadside to it. "Stick your paddle between 2 points of the rock, Tom," Harry shouted, "while the chief and I get them in. Sit well over on the other side of the boat." With considerable difficulty, Jerry, who was insensible, was lifted into the boat. As soon as he was laid down, Hunting Dog made his way hand over hand on the gunwale until close to the stern, where he swung himself into the boat without difficulty. "Have you seen Sam?" Harry asked. The young Indian shook his head. "Sam one side of the boat," he said. "Jerry and Hunting Dog the other. Boat went down that chute between those rocks above. Only just room for it. Jerry was knocked off by rock. Hunting Dog was near the stern. There was room for him. He caught Jerry's hunting shirt, but could not hold on to boat. When came down here, made jump at corner of rock. Could not hold on, but current swept him into eddy. Then swam here and held on and kept calling. Knew his brothers would come down soon." "Here is a spare paddle," Harry said, as he pulled one out from below the network. "There is not a moment to lose. Keep your eyes open, Chief." Again the boat moved down the stream. With 4 paddles going, the steersman had somewhat more control over her, but as she flew down the seething water, glanced past rocks, and sprang over falls, Tom expected her to capsize every moment. At last he saw below them a stretch of quiet water, and 2 or 3 minutes later they were floating upon it, and as if by a common impulse all ceased rowing. "Thanks be to God for having preserved us," Harry said reverently. "We are half full of water. Another 5 minutes of that work and it would have been all over with us. Do you see any signs of the canoe, Chief?" The chief pointed to a ledge of rock extending out into the stream. "Canoe there," he said. They paddled across to it. After what the young Indian had said, they had no hopes of finding Sam with it, but Harry gave a deep sigh as he stepped out onto the ledge. "Another gone," he said. "How many of us will get through this place alive? Let us carry Jerry ashore." There was a patch of sand swept up by the eddy below the rock, and here Jerry was taken out and laid down. He moaned as they lifted him. "Easy with him," Harry said. "Steady with that arm. I think he has a shoulder broken, as well as this knock on the head that has stunned him." As soon as he was laid down, Harry cut open his shirt on the shoulder. "Broken," he said shortly. "Now, Chief, I know that you are a good hand at this sort of thing. How had this better be bandaged?" "Want something soft first." Tom ran to the canoe, brought out the little canvas sack in which he carried his spare flannel shirt, and brought it to the chief. The latter tore off a piece of stuff and rolled it into a wad. "Want 2 pieces of wood," he said, holding his hands about a foot apart to show the length he required. Harry fetched the spare paddle and split a strip off each side of the blade. The chief nodded as he took them. "Good," he said. He tore off 2 more strips of flannel and wrapped them round the splints. Then, with Harry's aid, he placed the shoulder in its natural position, laid the wad of flannel on the top of it, and over this put the 2 splints. The whole was kept in its place by flannel bandages, and the arm was fastened firmly across the body, so that it could not be moved. Then the little keg of brandy was brought out of the canoe, a spoonful poured into the pannikin with half as much water, and allowed to trickle between Jerry's lips, while a wad of wet flannel was placed on his head. "There is nothing more we can do for him at present," Harry said. "Now we will right the other boat and get all the things out to dry." 3 or 4 pounds of flour were found to be completely soaked with water, but the main store was safe, as the bag was sewn up in bearskin. This was only opened occasionally to take out 2 or 3 days' supply, and then carefully closed again. On landing, Hunting Dog had at once started in search of driftwood, and by this time a fire was blazing. A piece of bear's fat was placed in the frying pan, and the wetted flour was at once fried into thin cakes, which were tough and tasteless, but the supply was too precious to allow of an ounce being wasted. Some slices of the flesh of the bighorn were cooked. "What is my white brother going to do?" the chief asked Harry. "There is nothing to do that I can see, Chief, but to keep on pegging away." We agreed that it would be almost impossible to find our way over these barren mountains. That is not to be thought of. Now that one of our number cannot walk, there is no choice left. We have got to go on." "Leaping Horse understand that," the chief said. "He meant would you take both canoes? One is big enough to take 5. "Quite big enough, chief, but it would be deeper in the water, and the heavier it is, the harder it will bump against any rock it meets. The lighter they are, the better. You see, this other canoe, which I dare say struck a dozen times on its way down, shows no sign of damage except the 2 rents in the skin that we can mend in a few minutes. Another thing is, 2 boats are absolutely necessary for this work of letting down by ropes, of which we may expect plenty more. If we had only one, we should be obliged to run every rapid. The only extra trouble that it will give us is at the portages. I think we had better stay here for 2 or 3 days, so as to give Jerry a chance of coming round. No doubt we could carry him over the portages just as we can carry the boats, but after such a knock on the head as he has had, it is best he should be kept quiet for a bit. If his skull is not cracked, he won't be long in getting round. He is as hard as nails, and will pull round in the 10th of the time it would take a man in the towns to get over such a knock. It is a pity the halt is not in a better place. There is not a shadow of a chance of finding game among these crags and bare rocks." From time to time fresh water was applied to the wad of flannel round Jerry's head. "Is there any chance, do you think, of finding poor Sam's body?" The chief shook his head. "No shores where it could be washed up. Rocks tear it to pieces, or if it get in an eddy, might be there for weeks. No see Sam any more." The fire was kept blazing all night, and they took it by turns to sit beside Jerry and to pour occasionally a little brandy and water between his lips. As the men were moving about preparing breakfast the next morning, Jerry suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at Tom, who was sitting beside him. "Time to get up?" he asked. "Why did you not wake me?" And he made an effort to move. Tom put his hand on him. "Lie still, Jerry. You have had a knock on the head, but you are all right now." The miner lay quiet. His eyes wandered confusedly over the figures of the others, who had, when they heard his voice, gathered round him. "What in the thunder is the matter with me?" he asked. "What is this thing on my head? What is the matter with my arm? I don't seem able to move it." "It is a knock you have had, Jerry," Harry said cheerfully. "You have got a bump upon your head half as big as a cocoanut, and you have damaged your shoulder. You've got a wet flannel on your head, and the chief has bandaged your arm. I expect your head will be all right in a day or 2, but I reckon you won't be able to use your arm for a bit." Jerry lay quiet without speaking for a few minutes. Then he said, "Oh, I remember now. We were capsized. I had a hold of the canoe, and I remember seeing a rock just ahead. I supposed I knocked against it. That was it, mate. Hunting Dog let go his hold and caught you, and managed to get into an eddy and cling to the rocks till we came down and took you on board." Jerry held out his hand to the Indian. "Thank ye," he said. "I owe you one, Hunting Dog. If I ever get the chance, you can reckon on me sure, whatever it is. But where is Sam? Why ain't he here?" "Sam has gone under, mate," Harry replied. "That chute you went down was only just wide enough for the boat to go through, and no doubt he was knocked off it at the same time as you were. But as the Indian was on your side, he saw nothing of Sam. I reckon he sank at once, just as you would have done if Hunting Dog hadn't been behind you." Jerry made no reply, but as he lay still, with his eyes closed, some big tears made their way through the lids and rolled down his bronzed face. The others thought it best to leave him by himself and continued their preparations for breakfast. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of In the Heart of the Rockies by G.A. Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by acamerer. Chapter 18, Back to Denver. "When are you going to make a start again?" Jerry asked, after drinking a pannikin of tea. We are not going on today, perhaps not tomorrow. It will depend on how you get on." "I shall be a nuisance to you anyway," the miner said, "and it would be a doggone sight the best way to leave me here. But I know you won't do that, so it ain't no use my asking you. I expect I shall be all right tomorrow, except for this shoulder. But just now my head is buzzing as if there was a swarm of wild bees inside." "You will be all the better when you have had a good sleep. I reckon we could all do a bit that way. Young Tom and Hunting Dog are going to try a bit of fishing with those hooks of yours. We talked about it when we started, you know, but we have not done anything until now. We want a change of food badly. We may be a month going down this canyon for anything I know, and if it keeps on like this, there ain't a chance of seeing a head of game. It ought to be a good place for fish at the foot of the rapids, that is, if there are any fish here, and I reckon there should be any amount of them. If they do catch some, we will wait here till we can dry a good stock. We have nothing now but the dried flesh and some of the bighorn. There ain't above 20 pounds of flour left, and we would clear up all there is in the boat in a week, so you need not worry that you are keeping us." Half an hour later, Hunting Dog and Tom put out in one of the canoes, and paddling to the foot of the rapids let the lines drop overboard, the hooks being baited with meat. It was not many minutes before the Indian felt a sharp pull. There was no occasion to play the fish, for the line was strong enough to hold a shark, and a trout of 6 pounds weight was soon laid in the bottom of the boat. "My turn now," Tom said, and the Indian with a smile took the paddle from his hand and kept the boat upstream while Tom attended to the lines. Fish after fish was brought up in rapid succession, and when about midday a call from below told them that it was time for dinner, they had some 30 fish averaging 5 pounds weight at the bottom of the boat. There was a shout of satisfaction from Harry as he looked down into the canoe, and even the chief gave vent to a grunt that testified his pleasure. "Hand me up 4 of them, Tom. I did not know how much I wanted a change of food till my eyes lit on those beauties. We saw you pulling them out, but I did not expect it was going to be as good as this." The fish were speedily split open and laid on ramrods over the fire. "I reckon you will want another one from me," Jerry, who had been asleep since they started, remarked. "I don't know that I am good for one as big as those, but I reckon I can pick a bit anyhow." A small fish was put on with the others, and as soon as they were grilled, all set to at what seemed to Tom the best meal he had ever eaten in his life. He thought when he handed them to Harry that 2 would have been amply sufficient for them all, but he found no difficulty whatever in disposing of a whole one single-handed. "Now, Tom, the chief and I will take our turn, while you and Hunting Dog prepare your catch. He will show you how to do it. It is simple enough. Cut off the heads, split and clean them, run a skewer through to keep them flat, and then lay them on that rock in the sun to dry. Or wait, and I will rig up a line between 2 of the rocks for you to hang them on. There is not much wind, but what there is will dry them better than if they were laid flat." Jerry went off to sleep again as soon as the meal was finished, and the bandages round his head re-wetted. The paddle from which the strips had been cut furnished wood for the skewers, and in the course of half an hour the fish were all hanging on a line. 22 more were brought in at sunset. Some of these, after being treated like the others, were hung in the smoke of the fire, while the rest were suspended like the first batch. The next morning Jerry was able to move about, and the fishing went on all day, and by night a quantity, considered sufficient, had been brought ashore. "There are over 400 pounds altogether," Harry said, "though by the time they are dried they won't be more than half that weight. 2 pounds of dried fish a man is enough to keep him going, and they will last us 20 days at that rate, and it will be hard luck if we don't find something to help it out as we go down." They stopped another day to allow the drying to be completed. The fish were taken down and packed on board that evening, and at daylight they were afloat again. For the next 10 days their labors were continuous. They passed several rapids as bad as the one that had cost them so dear, but as they gained experience they became more skillful in letting down the boats. Some days only 2 or 3 miles were gained. On others they made as much as 12. At last they got out of the granite. Beyond this the task was much easier, and on the 15th day after leaving their fishing ground, they emerged from the canyon. By this time Jerry had perfectly recovered and was with great difficulty persuaded to keep his arm bandaged. He had chafed terribly at first at his helplessness and at being unable to take any share in the heavy labors of the others. But after the rapids were passed, he was more contented and sat quietly at the bottom of the boat smoking, while Harry and Tom paddled, the two Indians forming the crew of the other canoe. The diet of fish had been varied by bear's flesh, Leaping Horse having shot a large brown bear soon after they got through the rapids. A shout of joy was raised by the three whites as they issued from the gorge into a quiet valley, through which the river ran, a broad, tranquil stream. Even the Indians were stirred to wave their paddles above their heads and to give a ringing whoop as their companions cheered. The boats were headed for the shore, and the camp was formed near a large clump of bushes. Their joy at their deliverance from the dangers of the canyon was dashed only by the thought of the loss of their two comrades. The next day 3 short canyons were passed through, but these presented no difficulties, and in the afternoon they reached the mouth of the Rio Virgen, and continuing their journey arrived 5 days later at Fort Mojave. This was a rising settlement, for it was here that the traders' route between Los Angeles and Santa Fe crossed the Colorado. Their appearance passed almost unnoticed, for a large caravan had arrived that afternoon and was starting east the next morning. "We had best hold our tongues about it altogether," Harry said, as soon as he heard that the caravan was going on the next morning. "In the first place, they won't believe us, and that would be likely to lead to trouble, and in the next place we should be worried out of our lives with questions. Besides, we have got to get a fresh outfit, for we are pretty near in rags, and to buy horses, food, and kit. We can leave the boats on shore. No one is likely to come near them." "I will stop and look after them," Tom said. "There are saddles, buffalo robes, blankets, and ammunition. This shirt is in rags, and the last moccasins Honey Dog made me are pretty nearly cut to pieces by the rocks. I would rather stay here and look after the boats than go into the village. Besides, it will save you the trouble of carrying all these bags of gold about with you." Harry nodded, cut 2 of the little bags free from their lashings, and dropped them into his pocket, and then went up to the fort with Jerry and the Indians. Tom cut the other bags loose and put them on the ground beside him, threw a buffalo robe over them, and then sat for some hours watching the quiet river and thinking over all they had gone through. It was almost dark when the others returned. "It has taken us some time, Tom," his uncle said as they threw some bundles down beside him. "The stores and clothes were easy enough, but we had a lot of trouble to find horses. However, we did not mind much what we paid for them, and the traders were ready to sell a few at the prices we offered. So we have got 5 riding horses and 2 pack ponies, which will be enough for us. That bundle is your lot: riding breeches and boots, 3 pairs of stockings, 2 flannel shirts, a Mexican hat, and a silk-necked handkerchief. We may as well change at once and go up to the village." The change was soon effected. Harry and Jerry Curtis had clothes similar to those they had bought for Tom, while the Indians wore over their shirts new deerskin embroidered hunting shirts, and had fringed Mexican leggings instead of breeches and boots. They, too, had procured Mexican sombreros. Taking their rifles and pistols, and hiding their stock of ammunition, the gold, and their buffalo robes and blankets, they went up to the village. It was by this time quite dark. The houses were all lit up, and the drinking shops crowded with the teamsters, who seemed bent on making a night of it, this being the last village through which they would pass until their arrival at Santa Fe. They slept as usual, wrapped up in their buffalo robes by the side of the boats, as all agreed that this was preferable to a close room in a Mexican house. They were all afoot as soon as daylight broke, and went up and breakfasted at a fonda, Tom enjoying the Mexican cookery after the simple diet he had been accustomed to. Then they went to the stable where the horses, which were strong, serviceable-looking animals, had been placed and put on their saddles and bridles. The pack horses were then laden with flour, tea, sugar, bacon, and other necessaries. By the time all was ready, the caravan was just starting. Harry had spoken the afternoon before of 2 of its leaders, and said that he and 4 companions would be glad to ride with them to Santa Fe. Permission was readily granted, the traders being pleased at the accession of 5 well-armed men, for although Indian raids were comparatively rare along this trail, there was still a certain amount of danger involved in the journey. Some hours were occupied in crossing the river in 2 heavy ferry boats, and the process would have been still longer had not half the wagons been sent across on the previous afternoon. The journey was made without incident, and no Indians were met with. A few deer were shot, but as it was now late in the autumn, the scanty herbage on the plains was all withered up, and the game had for the most part moved away into deep valleys where they could obtain food. The tale of their passage of the canyons was told more than once, but although it was listened to with interest, Harry perceived that it was not really believed. That they had been hunting, had been attacked by Indians, had made canoes and passed through some of the canyons was credible enough, but that they should have traversed the whole of the lower course of the Colorado seemed to the traders, who were all men experienced in the country, simply incredible. The party stopped at Santa Fe a few days, and then started north, traveling through the Mexican villages, and finally striking across to Denver. At Santa Fe they had converted the contents of their bags into money, which had been equally shared among them. The Indians were not willing to accept more than the recognized monthly pay, but Harry would not hear of it. "This has been no ordinary business, Leaping Horse," he said warmly. "We have all been as brothers together, and for weeks have looked death in the face every hour, and we must share all round alike in the gold we have brought back. Gold is just as useful to an Indian as it is to a white man, and when you add this to the hoard you spoke of, you will have enough to buy as many horses and blankets as you can use all your lifetime, and to settle down in your wigwam and take a wife to yourself whenever you choose. I fancy from what you said, Hunting Dog has his eye on one of the maidens of your tribe. Well, he can buy her father's favor now. The time is coming, Chief, when the Indians of the plains will have to take to white men's ways. The buffaloes are fast dying out, and in a few years it will be impossible to live by hunting, and the Indians will have to keep cattle and build houses and live as we do. With his money, Hunting Dog could buy a tidy ranch with a few hundred head of cattle. Of course, he can hunt as much as he likes, so long as there is any game left, but he will find that as his cattle increase, he will have plenty to look after at home." "We will take the gold if my brother wishes it," the chief replied gravely. "He is wise, and though it seems to Leaping Horse that redskins have no need of gold, it may be that some day he and Hunting Dog may be glad that they have done as their brother wished." "Thank you, Leaping Horse. It will make my heart glad when I may be far away from you across the great salt water, to know that there will always be comfort in my brother's wigwam." On arriving at Denver, they went straight to the Empire. As they entered the saloon, Pete Hoskins looked hard at them. "Straight Harry, by thunder!" he shouted, "and Jerry Curtis, and young Tom, though I would not have known him if he hadn't been with the others. Well, this air a good sight for the eyes, and tomorrow Christmas Day. I had begun to be afeard that something had gone wrong with you. I looked for news from you nigh 3 months ago. I got the message you sent me in the spring, and I have asked every old hand who came along east since the end of August if there had been any news of you, and I began to fear that you had been rubbed out by the Utes. We have had a near escape of it, Pete, but it is a long story. Can you put us all up? You know Leaping Horse, don't you? The other is his nephew." "I should think I do know Leaping Horse," Pete said warmly, and went across and shook the Indian's hand heartily. "I was looking at you 3 and did not notice who you had with you. In that letter the chap brought me, you said that the chief was going with you, and Sam Hicks and Ben Gulston. I did not know them so well. That is, I never worked with them, though they have stopped here many a time. They have gone under, Pete. Sam was drowned in the Colorado, Ben shot by the Navajos. We have all had some close calls, I can tell you. Well, now, can you put us up?" "You need not ask such a question as that, Harry," Pete said in an aggrieved tone, "when you know very well that if the place was chock full I would clear the crowd out to make room for you. There are 3 beds in the room over this that will do for you 3, and there is a room beside it as Leaping Horse and his nephew can have." though I reckon they won't care to sleep on the beds. No more shall we, Pete. We have been 15 months and more sleeping in the open, and we would rather have our buffalo robes and blankets than the softest bed in the world. You must have had a cold time of it in the last 3 months up in those Ute hills, where you said you were going. We left there 5 months ago, Pete. We have been down as low as Fort Mojave, and then crossed with a caravan of traders to Santa Fe. Pete began pouring out the liquor. Oh, you won't take one, Chief, nor the young brave. Yes, I remember you do not touch the firewater, and you may be sure I won't press you. Well, luck to you all, and right glad I am to see you again. Ah, here is my bartender. Now we will get a good fire lit in another room and hurry up supper, and then we will talk it all over. You have put your horses up, I suppose? Yes, we knew you had no accommodation that way, Pete. The room into which Pete now led them was not his own sanctum, but one used occasionally when a party of miners coming in from the hills wanted to have a feast by themselves, or when customers wished to talk over private business. There was a table capable of seating some 12 people, a great stove, and some benches. A negro soon lighted a large fire, then, aided by a boy, laid the table, and it was not long before they sat down to a good meal. When it was over, Pete said, "Lend me a hand, Jerry, to push this table aside. Then we will bring the benches round the stove and hear all about it. I told the bartender that I am not to be disturbed, and that if anyone wants to see me, he is to say that he has got to wait till tomorrow, for that I am engaged on important business. Here are brandy and whiskey, and tobacco and cigars and coffee for the chief and his nephew." "I think you may say for all of us, Pete," Harry said. "After being a year without spirits, Jerry, Tom, and I have agreed to keep without them. We wouldn't say no to you when you asked us to take a drink, and we have not sworn off, but Jerry and I have agreed that we have both been all the better without them, and mean to keep to it. And as for Tom, he prefers coffee." "Do as you please," Pete said. "I am always glad to hear men say no. I have made a lot of money out of it, but I have seen so many fellows ruined by it that I am always pleased to see a man give up drink." "There is one thing, Pete," Tom said, "before we begin. We left our bundles of robes and blankets in the next room. If you don't mind, I would a deal rather spread them out here, and I am sure the chief and Hunting Dog would, and squat down on them instead of sitting on these benches. It is a long story Uncle will have to tell you." "We will fetch ours too," Harry agreed. "Benches are all well enough for sitting at the table to eat one's dinner, but why a man should sit on them when he can sit on the ground is more than I can make out." Pete nodded. "I will have my rocking chair in," he said, "and then we shall be fixed up for the evening." The arrangements were soon made. Pipes were lighted. The landlord sat in his chair at some little distance back from the front of the stove. Tom and the two Indians sat on their rugs on one side. Harry and Jerry Curtis completed the semicircle on the other. "Well, in the first place, Pete," Harry began, "you will be glad to hear that we have struck it rich, the biggest thing I have ever seen. It is up in the Ute country. We have staked out a claim for you next our own. There are about 500 pounds of samples lying at Fort Bridger, and a bit of the rock we crushed panned out 500 ounces to the ton." "You don't say!" Pete exclaimed. "If there is much of that stuff, Harry, you have got a bonanza." "There is a good bit of it anyhow, Pete. It is a true vein, and though it is not all like that, it keeps good enough. 50 feet back we found it run 20 ounces. That is on the surface. We can't say how it goes down in depth. Where we struck it on the face, it was about 14 feet high, and the load kept its width for that depth anyhow." "That air good enough," the landlord said. "Now, what do you reckon on doing?" "The place is among the hills, Pete, and the Utes are hostile, and went very nigh rubbing us all out. We reckon it ought to be worked by a party of 30 men at least. They ought to be well armed, and must build a sort of fort. I don't think the Utes would venture to attack them if they were of that strength. There is a little stream runs close to the vein, and if it were dammed up it would drive a couple of stamps, which, with a concentrator and tables and blankets, would be quite enough for such stuff as that. I reckon 15 men will be quite enough to work and to hold the fort. The other 15 men would include 3 or 4 hunters, and the rest would go backwards and forwards to Bridger for supplies and to take the gold down. They would be 7 or 8 days away at a time, and if there should be trouble with the redskins, they would always be back before those at the fort were really pressed. But we should not be alone long. The news that a rich thing had been struck would bring scores of miners up in no time. We have taken up our own 10 claims, which will include, of course, the rich part. Then we have taken up the next 8 or 10 claims for our friends. As I said, we put yours next to ours. We have not registered them yet, but that will be the first job. And of course you and the others will each have to put a man on your claims to hold them. The lode shows on the other side of the creek, though not so rich, still plenty good enough to work. But as we shall practically get all the water, the lode cannot be worked by anyone but ourselves. Still, the gravel is rich all down the creek, as rich as anything I have seen in California, and will be sure to be taken up by miners as soon as we are at work, so there will be no real danger of trouble from the Indians then. What we propose is this. We don't want to sell out. We think it is good enough to hold, but we want to get a company to find the money for getting up the machinery, building a strong blockhouse with a palisade, lying in stores, and working the place. Jerry, Tom, and I would, of course, be in command, at any rate for the first year or so, when the rich stuff was being worked. How much money do you think it will want, and what share do you think of giving, Harry? Well, I should say $50,000, though I believe half that would be enough. Not a penny would be required after the first ton of rock goes through the stamps. But we should have to take the stamps and ironwork from the railway terminus to Bridger, and then down. We might calculate on a month or 6 weeks in getting up the fort, making the leat and water wheel, putting up the machinery, and laying down the flumes. Say 2 months from the time we leave Bridger to the time we begin to work. There would be the pay of the men all that time, the cost of transporting stores, and all that sort of thing, so it would be better to say $50,000. What share ought we to offer for that? Well, if you could bring that 500 weight of stuff here and get it crushed up, and it turns out as good as you say, I could get you the money in 24 hours. I would not mind going half of it myself, and I should say that a quarter share would be more than good enough. Well, we thought of a third, Pete. Well, if you say a third, you may consider that part of the business is done. You won't be able to apply for claims in the names of Sam and Ben, and if you did, it would be no good, because they could not assign them over to the company. There are 8 claims without them, and the one you have put down in my name is 9. Well, I can get, say, 11 men in this place, who will give you an assignment of their claims for $5 apiece. That is done every day. I just say to them I am registering a share in your name in the Tomcat mine, write an assignment to me of it, and I am good for $5 worth of liquor. Take it out as you like. The thing is as easy as falling off a log. Well, what are you thinking of doing next? We shall buy a light wagon and team tomorrow or next day and drive straight over to Bridger. Then we shall go to Salt Lake City and register our claims at the mining office there. We need not give the locality very precisely. Indeed, we could not describe it ourselves so that anyone could find it, and nobody would go looking for it before spring comes and the snow clears. Besides, there are scores of wildcat claims registered every year. Until they turn out good, no one thinks anything of them. When we have got that done, we will go back to Bridger and fetch the rock over here. We will write tomorrow to Pittsburgh for the mining outfit, for all the iron work of the stamps, the concentrator, and everything required, with axes, picks, and shovels, blasting tools, and powder, to be sent as far as they have got the railway. But they will want the money with the order, Harry, Pete said in a tone of surprise. They will have the money. We washed the gravel for a couple of months before the Utes lit on us, and after buying horses and a fresh outfit for us all at Fort Mojave, we have between us got something like $5,000 in gold and greenbacks. Jehoshaphat, Pete exclaimed. That was good indeed for 2 months' work. Well, look here, there is no hurry for a few days about your starting back to Bridger. Here we are now, nearly at the end of December. It will take you a month to get there, say another fortnight to go on to Salt Lake City and register your claim and get back to Bridger. Then it would be a month getting back here again. That would take you to the middle of March. Well, you see, it would be pretty nigh the end of April before you were back at Bridger. Then you would have to get your wagons and your men, and that would be too late altogether. You have got to pick your miners carefully, I can tell you, and it is not a job to be done in a hurry. When they see what gold there is in the rock, they will soon set to work washing the gravel, and the day they do, they will chuck up your work altogether. I will tell you what I would rather do, and that is pick up green hands from the east. There are scores of them here now, men who have come as far as this and can't start west till the snows melt. You need not think anything more about the money. You tell me what you crushed is a fair sample of that 500 pounds, and that is quite good enough for me. And the gravel, being so rich, is another proof of what the load was when the stream cut through it. I can put the $25,000 down, and there are plenty of men here who will take my word for the affair and plank their money down too. If there weren't, I would put a mortgage on my houses so that matter is done. Tomorrow I will get the men whose names you are to give in for a claim each. It will be time in another 2 months to begin to look about for some steady chaps from the east, farmers' sons and such like. That is, if you think that plan is a good one. I mean to see this thing through, and I shall go with you myself, and we three can do the blasting. We shall be wanted to look after the stamps and pans, Harry said. We had best get 3 or 4 old hands for the rock. Yes, that is best, Pete said. Between us, it is hard if we can't lay our hands upon men we can trust, and who will give us their word to stay with us if we offer them $6 a day. We might offer them $10, Harry said, without hurting ourselves, but we can say $6 to begin with and put some more on afterwards. There is old Matt Morgan, Jerry put in. I don't know whether he is about here now. I would trust him. He is getting old for prospecting among the hills now, but he is as good as a miner as ever swung a sledgehammer, and as straight as they make them. Yes, he's a good man, Pete agreed, and after some talk they settled upon 3 others, all of whom, Pete said, were either in the town or would be coming in shortly. Now you stop here for a week or 2, or a month if you like, Harry. Then you can go to Salt Lake City as you propose, and then go back to Bridger. If, as you pass through, you send me 25 pounds of that rock by express, it will make it easier for me to arrange the money affair. When you get back, you might crush the rest up and send me word what it has panned out. Then later on, you can go down again to Salt Lake City and buy the wagons and flour and bacon, and take them back to Bridger. When March comes in, I will start from here with some wagons. We want them to take the machinery and powder and tools, and the tea and coffee and things like that, of which we will make a list, on to Bridger, with the 4 men we pick out. If I can get them all, if not some others in their place, and a score of young immigrants. I shall have no difficulty in picking out sober, steady chaps, for in a place like this I can find out about their habits before I engage them. However, there will be plenty of time to settle all those points. Now let us hear all about your adventures. I have not heard about you since Tom left, except that he wrote me a short letter from Bridger's saying that you had passed the winter up among the mountains by the Big Wind River, that you had had troubles with the Indians and hadn't been able to do much trapping or looking for gold. Well, we will tell it between us, Harry said, for it is a long yarn. It was indeed past midnight before the story was all told. Long before it was finished, the 2 Indians had taken up their rugs and gone up to their room, and although the other 3 had taken by turns to tell the tale of their adventures, they were all hoarse with speaking by the time they got through. Pete had often stopped them to ask questions at various points where the narrators had been inclined to cut the story short. "That beats all," he said, when they brought it to an end. "Only to think that you have gone down the Grand Canyon. I would not have minded being with you when you were fighting the Rapahoes or the Utes, but I would not try going down the canyons for all the gold in California. Well, look here, boys. I know that what you tell me is gospel truth, and all the men who know you well will believe every word you say, but I would not tell the tale to strangers, for they would look on you as the all-firedest liars in creation. We have learnt that already, Pete," Harry laughed, "and we mean to keep it to ourselves, at any rate till we have got the mine at work. People may not believe the story of a man in a red shirt, and mind you, I have heard a good many powerful lies told round a miner's fire, but when it is known we have got a wonderfully rich gold mine, I fancy it will be different. The men would say if fellows are sharp enough to find a bonanza, it stands to reason they may be sharp enough to find their way down a canyon. Now let us be off to bed, for the heat of the stove has made me so sleepy that for the last hour I have hardly been able to keep my eyes open, and have scarcely heard a word of what Jerry and Tom have been saying. They only remained a few days at Denver. After the life they had been leading, they were very speedily tired of that of the town, and at the end of a week they started on horseback with a light wagon drawn by a good team to carry their stores for the journey and to serve as a sleeping place. There had been no question about the Indians accompanying them. This was regarded as a matter of course. It was by no means a pleasant journey. They had frequent snowstorms and biting wind, and had sometimes to work for hours to get the wagon out of deep snow, which had filled up gullies and converted them into traps. After a stay of 3 days at Fort Bridger to rest the animals, they went on to Utah, having forwarded the sample of quartz to Pete Hoskins. A fortnight was spent at Salt Lake City. Wagons, bullocks, and stores were purchased, and Harry arranged with some teamsters to bring the wagons out to Fort Bridger as soon as the snow cleared from the ground. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of In the Heart of the Rockies by G.A. Henty. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by acamerer. Chapter 19. A Fortune. On their return to Fort Bridger, Harry and his companions pounded up the quartz that had been left there, and found that its average equaled that of the piece they had tried at the mine. The gold was packed in a box and sent to Pete Hoskins. A letter came back in return from him, saying that 5 of his friends had put in $5,000 each, and that he should start with the stores and machinery as soon as the track was clear of snow. The season was an early one, and in the middle of April he arrived with 4 large wagons and 20 active-looking young immigrants and 4 miners, all of whom were known to Harry. There was a good deal of talk at Bridger about the expedition, and many offered to take service in it. But when Harry said that the lode they were going to prospect was in the heart of the Ute country, and that he himself had been twice attacked by the redskins, the eagerness to accompany him abated considerably. The fact, too, that it was a vein that would have to be worked by machinery was in itself sufficient to deter solitary miners from trying to follow it up. Scarce a miner but had located a score of claims in different parts of the country, and these being absolutely useless to them, without capital to work them with, they would gladly have disposed of them for a few dollars. It was not, therefore, worth while to risk a perilous journey merely on the chance of being able to find another vein in the neighborhood of that worked by Harry and the men who had gone into it with him. There was, however, some surprise among the old hands when Pete Hoskins arrived with the wagons. "What, have you cut the saloon, Pete, and are you going in for mining again?" one of them said as he alighted from his horse. Pete gave a portentous wink. "I guess I know what I'm doing, Joe Radley. I am looking after the interests of a few speculators at Denver, who have an idea that they are going to get rich all of a sudden. I was sick of the city, and it just suited me to take a run and to get out of the place for a few months. Do you think it is rich, Pete?" "One can never say," Hoskins replied with a grin. "We are not greenhorns, any of us, and we know there is no saying how things are going to turn out. Straight Harry has had a run of bad luck for the last 2 years, and I'm glad to give him a shoulder up, you know. I reckon he won't come badly off anyway it turns out." It was not much, but it was quite enough to send a rumor round the fort that Pete Hoskins had been puffing up a wildcat mine in Denver for the sake of getting Straight Harry appointed boss of the expedition to test it. Everything was ready at Bridger, and they delayed but 24 hours there. The teams had arrived from Salt Lake City with the stores a week before, and the 8 wagons set off together. Pete, the 3 partners, the 2 Indians, and the 4 miners were all mounted. There were 8 other horses ridden by as many of the young fellows Pete had brought with him. The rest walked on foot. They marched directly for the mine, as with such a force it was not necessary to make a detour over the Badlands. At the first halting place, some long cases Pete had brought with him were opened, and a musket handed to each of the emigrants, together with a packet of ammunition. "Now," Pete said, "if the Utes meddle with us, we will give them fits, but I reckon they will know better than to interfere with us." The rate of progress with the heavy wagons was necessarily very much slower than that at which the party had traveled on their previous journey, and it was not until the afternoon of the 8th day after starting that they came down into the valley. A halt was made at the former camping place in the grove of trees, and the next morning Pete and the miners went up with Harry and his friends to choose a spot for the fort and to examine the load. As soon as the earth was scraped away from the spot from which the rock had been taken, exclamations of astonishment broke from the miners. They had been told by Pete that Harry had struck it rich, but all were astonished at the numerous particles and flakes of gold that protruded from the rock. Pete had forwarded early in the spring to Harry the list of the claimants to the mine, and the latter and Tom had ridden over to Salt Lake City a few days before the wagons came up from there to register the claims at the mining office, and the first step was to stake out these claims upon the load. "It doesn't run like this far," Harry said to the miners, "and I reckon that beyond our ground it doesn't run above 2 ounces to the ton, so I don't think it's worth while you're taking up claims beyond. Of course, you can do so if you like, and we will allow you an hour off every few days during the season to work your claims enough to keep possession, and of an evening you can do a bit of washing down below. You will find it good pay dirt everywhere. At least we did as far as we tried it." They now fixed on the site for the fort. It was upon the top of the bank, some 20 yards above the load, and it was settled there should be a strong double palisade running down from it to the stream, so that in case of siege they could fetch water without being exposed to the bullets of an enemy taking post higher up the creek. Among the men from Denver were 2 or 3 experienced carpenters and a blacksmith, for whose use a portable forge had been brought in the wagons. The party returned to breakfast, and as soon as this was over, the teams were put in and the wagons were brought up and unloaded, the stores being protected from wet by the canvas that formed the tilts. Some of the men accustomed to the use of the axe had been left in the valley to fell trees, and as soon as the wagons were unloaded, they were sent down to bring up timber. All worked hard, and at the end of the week a log hut 50 feet long and 25 feet wide had been erected. The walls were 5 feet high, and the roof was formed by the trunks of young trees squared and laid side by side. As rain fell seldom in that region, it was not considered necessary to place shingles over them, as this could, in case of need, be done later on. The door opened out into the passage between the palisades down to the water, and the windows were all placed on the same side, loopholes being cut at short intervals round the other 3 sides. Another fortnight completed the preparations for work. The stamps were erected, with the water wheel to work them, the stream dammed 100 yards up, and a lead constructed to bring the water down to the wheel. The wagons were formed up in a square. In this the horses were shut every night, 4 of the men by turns keeping guard there. During the last few days the miners had been at work blasting the quartz, and as soon as the stamps and machinery were in position they were ready to begin. The men were all told off to various duties, some to carry the rock down to the stamps, others to break it up into convenient sizes. 2 men fed the stamps, others attended to the concentrator and blankets, supervised by Harry. It was the duty of some to take the horses down to the valley and guard them while they were feeding and bring them back at night. 2 men were to bake and cook, Pete Hoskins taking this special department under his care. Jerry worked with the miners, and Tom was his uncle's assistant. The stamps were to be kept going night and day, and each could crush a ton in 24 hours. To their great satisfaction, each of the men was allowed 1 day a week to himself, during which he could prospect for other loads or wash gravel as he pleased. The old cradle was found where it had been left, and as 5 of the men were off duty each day, they formed themselves into gangs and worked the cradle by turns, adding very considerably to the liberal pay they received. The 2 Indians hunted, and seldom returned without game of some sort or other. As the quicksilver in the concentrator was squeezed by Harry or Tom, and the blankets washed by them, none but themselves knew what the returns were. They and their partners were, however, more than satisfied with the result, for although the load was found to pinch in as they got lower, it maintained for the first 6 weeks the extraordinary average of that they had first crushed. At the end of that time, the Indians reported that they had seen traces of the Utes having visited the valley. The number of men who went down with the horses was at once doubled, one or other of the Indians staying down with them, preceding them in the morning by half an hour to see that the valley was clear. A week later, the horses were seen coming back again a quarter of an hour after they had started. The men caught up their guns, which were always placed handy for them while at work, and ran out to meet the returning party. "What is it, Hunting Dog?" "A large war party," the Indian replied. 300 or more. The horses were driven into the enclosure. Half the men took their places among the wagons, and the others, clustered around the hut, prepared to enter it as soon as the Indians made their appearance. The partners had already arranged what course to take if the Indians should come down on them, and were for all reasons most anxious that hostilities should if possible be avoided. Presently the Indians were seen approaching at a gallop. As soon as they caught sight of the log house and the enclosure of wagons, they reined in their horses. The men had been ordered to show themselves, and the sight of some 40 white men, all armed with rifles, brought the Indians to a dead standstill. Pete Hoskins went forward a little and waved a white cloth, and then Harry and the chief, leaving their rifles behind them, stepped up to his side and held their arms aloft. There was a short consultation among the Indians, and then 2 chiefs dismounted, handed their rifles and spears to their men, and in turn advanced. Harry and Leaping Horse went forward until they met the chiefs halfway between the 2 parties. Harry began the conversation. "Why do my red brothers wish to fight?" he asked. "We are doing them no harm. We are digging in the hills. Why should we not be friends?" "The white men killed many of the Utes when they were here last year," one of the chiefs replied. "Why do they come upon the Utes' land?" "It was the fault of the Utes," Harry said. "The white men wished only to work in peace. The Utes tried to take their scalps, and the white men were forced against their will to fight. No one can be blamed for defending his life. We wish for peace, but as the Utes can see, we are quite ready to defend ourselves. There are 40 rifles loaded and ready, and as you may see, a strong house. We have no fear. Last time we were but few, but the Utes found that it was not easy to kill us. Now we are many, and how many of the Utes would die before they took our scalps? Nevertheless, we wish for peace. The land is the land of the Utes, and although we are strong and could hold it if we chose, we do not wish to take it by force from our red brothers. We are ready to pay for the right to live and work quietly. Let the chiefs go back to their friends and talk together, and say how many blankets and how many guns and what weight of ammunition and tobacco they will be content with. Then, if they do not ask too much, the white men will, so long as they remain here, pay that amount each year in order that they may live in peace with the Utes." The 2 Indians glanced at each other. "My white brother is wise," one said. "Why did he not tell the Utes so last year?" "Because you never gave us time, Chief. If you had done so, we would have said the same to you then, and your young men would be with you now. But you came as enemies upon us, and when the rifle is speaking, the voice is silent." "I will speak with my braves," the chief said gravely, and turning round, they walked back to their party, while Harry and the chief returned to the huts. "What do you think, Chief? Will it be peace?" Leaping Horse nodded. "Too many rifles," he said. "The Utes will know they could never take Blockhouse." It was nearly 2 hours before the 2 Utes advanced as before, and Harry and the Seneca went out to meet them. "My white brother's words are good," the chief said. "The Utes are great warriors, but they do not wish to fight against the white men who come as friends. The chiefs have talked with their braves, and the hatchets will be buried. This is what the Utes ask, that the white men who have taken their land shall pay them." Harry had arranged that the chief, who spoke the Ute language more perfectly than he did, should take charge of the bargaining. On the list being given, Leaping Horse assumed an expression of stolid indifference. "The land must be very dear in the Ute country," he said. "Do my brothers suppose that the white men are mad that they ask such terms? Peace would be too dear if bought at such a price. They are willing to deal liberally with the Utes, but not to give as much as would buy 20 hills. They will give this," and he enumerated a list of articles amounting to about 1/4 of the Indians' demands. The bargaining now went on in earnest, and finally it was settled that a quantity of goods amounting to about half the Indians' first demand should be accepted, and both parties returned to their friends well satisfied. A certain amount of goods had been brought out with a view to such a contingency, and half the amount claimed was handed over to the Utes. They had, indeed, more than enough to satisfy the demands, but Leaping Horse had suggested to Harry that only a portion should be given, as otherwise the Indians might suppose that their wealth was boundless. It would be better to promise to deliver the rest in 3 months' time. A dozen of the principal men of the Utes came over. The goods were examined and accepted, the calumet of peace was smoked, and a solemn covenant of friendship entered into, and by the next morning the Indians had disappeared. One end of the hut had been partitioned off for the use of the leaders of the party, and the gold obtained each day was carried by them there and deposited in a strong iron box, of which several had been brought by Pete Hoskins from Denver. The day after the Indians left, a wagon was sent off under the escort of 8 mounted laborers to Bridger, and this continued to make the journey backward and forward regularly with the boxes of gold, Jerry and Pete Hoskins taking it by turns to command the escort. Harry and Pete had had a talk with the officer in command at Bridger on the evening before they had started on the expedition. "You think you're going to send in a large quantity of gold?" the officer asked. "If the mines are such as we think, Major, we may be sending down 200 or 300 weight a month. Of course, the gold will be perfectly safe as long as it is in the fort, but if it gets known how much there is, you will want a strong convoy to take it across to the railway, and it would not be safe even then. Of course, the bulk is nothing. I should say at any rate you had better get it in here with as little fuss as possible." "If you will keep it here for a while," Pete said, "we will think over afterwards how it is to be taken further." The officer nodded. "It mayn't turn out as difficult a business as you think," he said with a smile. "You are both old hands enough to know that mines very seldom turn out as rich as they are expected to do." "We both know that," Pete Hoskins agreed. "I don't know as I ever did hear of a mine that turned out anything nigh as good as it ought to have done from samples, but I reckon that this is going to be an exception." Within a few miles of the fort, the escort always placed their rifles in the wagon and rode on some distance ahead of it, only 1 or 2 with their leader remaining by it. The boxes, which were of no great size, were covered by a sack or 2 thrown down in the corner of the wagon, and on its arrival in the fort it was taken first to the store, where a considerable quantity of provisions, flour, molasses, bacon, tea and sugar, currants and raisins, and other articles were purchased and placed in it. This was the ostensible purpose of the journey to the fort. Later in the evening, Jerry or Pete, whichever happened to be the leader, and one of the men carried the boxes across to the major's quarters and stored them in a cellar beneath it. There was a real need of provisions at the mine, for the population of the valley rapidly increased as the season went on. The upper part of the bed of the stream had been staked out into claims, the miners and other men each taking up one, but below them the ground was of course open to all, and although not nearly so rich as the upper grapple, it was good enough to pay fairly for working. A stout palisading now surrounded the ground taken up by the machinery and the mine itself, and no one except those engaged by the company were allowed to enter here. Considerable surprise was felt in the camp when the first 2 or 3 miners came up and staked out claims on the stream. "I wonder how they could have heard of it," Tom said to his uncle. "The fact that we are remaining here is enough to show that we are doing something anyhow. The men who go in are always strictly ordered to say no word about what our luck is, but the mere fact that they hold their tongues, and you may be sure they are questioned sharply, is enough to excite curiosity, and these men have come to find out and see what the country is like, and to prospect the hills round where we are working. You will see a lot of them here before long." As more came up, it was determined to open a store. In the first place, it furnished an explanation for the wagon going down so often, and in the second, the fact that they were ready to sell provisions at cost prices would deter others from coming and setting up stores. There was no liquor kept on the mine, and Pete and Harry were very anxious that no places for its sale should be opened in the valley. During the winter and spring, Tom had received several letters from his sisters. They expressed themselves as very grateful for the money that he and their uncle had sent on their return to Denver, but begged him to send no more, as the school was flourishing, and they were perfectly able to meet all their expenses. "It is very good of you, Tom," Carrie said. "Of course we are all very pleased to know that you have been able to send the money, because it relieves our anxiety about you. But we really don't want it, and it makes us afraid that you are stinting yourself. Besides, even if you are not, it would be much better for you to keep the money, as you may find some opportunity of using it to your advantage, while here it would only lie in the bank and do no good. It would be different if we had nothing to fall back upon in case of anything happening, such as some of us getting ill or having a case of fever in the school, or anything of that sort. But as we have only used £50 of Mother's money, we have plenty to go on with for a very long time, so that really we would very much rather you did not send us any over. Now that we know your address and can write to you at Fort Bridger, it seems to bring you close to us. But we have had two very anxious times, especially the first, when we did not hear of you for 6 months. The second time was not so bad, as you had told us that it might be a long time before we should hear, and we were prepared for it, but I do hope it will never be so long again." There had been some discussion as to whether the mine should be shut down in winter, but it was soon decided that work should go on regularly. 6 more stamps were ordered to be sent from the east, with a steam engine powerful enough to work the whole battery, and in September this and other machinery had reached the mine. Fresh buildings had been erected, a storehouse, a house for the officers, and a shed covering the whole of the machinery and yard. By the time this was all ready and in place, the valley below was deserted, the gravel having been washed out to the bedrock. No other lodes of sufficient richness to work had been discovered by the prospectors, and with winter at hand, there was no inducement for them to stay longer there. Only 2 or 3 of the men at the mine wished to leave when their engagement for the season terminated. All had been well paid, and had in addition made money at gold washing. Their food had been excellent, and their comforts attended to in all ways. Accordingly, with these exceptions, all were ready to renew their engagements. An arrangement was made with the major at Fort Bridger for an escort under a subaltern officer to proceed with 2 wagons with the treasure to Denver. Pete Hoskins and Jerry were to remain as managers of the mine throughout the winter. Harry and Tom had made up their minds to go to England and to return in the spring. The ore was now very much poorer than it had been at first. The lode had pinched out below, and they had worked some distance along it. The falling off, however, was only relative. The mine was still an extraordinarily rich one, although it contained little more than 1/10 of the gold that had been extracted from the first 150 tons crushed. None but Harry, Pete Hoskins, Jerry, and Tom had any idea of the amount of gold extracted in less than 6 months, although the miners were well aware that the amount must be very large. It was so indeed, for after repaying the amount expended in preliminary expenses, together with the new machinery, the wages of the men, provisions, and all outgoings, they calculated the treasure sent down to be worth £128,000, while the mine, if sold, would fetch at least double that sum. After a hearty farewell to Pete and Jerry, Harry and Tom, with the 2 Indians, rode with the last wagon down to Bridger. The iron boxes had been all sewn up in deerskins when they were sent down, and at night they were placed in the wagons by Harry and his companions. Over them were placed the provisions for the journey, as it was just as well that even the soldiers should not suspect the amount of treasure they were escorting. They encountered some severe snowstorms by the way, but reached Denver without incident. The place had wonderfully changed since Tom had arrived there more than 2 years before. It had trebled in size, broad streets and handsome houses had been erected, and the town had spread in all directions. They drove straight to the bank, to which Pete Hoskins had sent down a letter a fortnight before they had started, and the boxes were taken out of the wagon and carried down into the vaults of the bank. A handsome present was made to each of the soldiers of the escort. A brace of revolvers was given by Harry to the subaltern, and the handsomest watch and chain that could be purchased in Denver was sent by him to the major, with an inscription expressing the thanks of the company to him for his kindness. "Well, Tom, I am thankful that is off my mind," Harry said. "I have had a good many troubles in the course of my life, but this is the first time that money has ever been a care to me. Well, we are rich men, Tom, and we shall be richer, for the mine will run another 2 or 3 years before it finishes up the load as far as we have traced it, and as we have now filed claims for a quarter of a mile further back, it may be good for aught I know for another 10 years. Not so good as it has been this year, but good enough to give handsome profits. Have you calculated what our share is?" "No, uncle. I know it must be a lot, but I have never thought about what each share will be." "Well, to begin with, a third of it goes to Pete Hoskins and his friends. That leaves 85,000. The remainder is divided into 7 shares. I was to have 2, the Indians 3 between them, you 1, and Jerry 1. His share is then about 12,000, which leaves 73,000 between you and me. Of course we shall divide equally." "No, indeed, uncle, that would be ridiculous. I have been of very little use through it all, and I certainly ought not to have as much as Jerry. You and the chief discovered it, and it was entirely owing to you that any of the rest of us have a share in the profits. And of course your arrangement with the 2 Indians is only because the chief is so fond of you." "Partly that, Tom, but chiefly because it is in accordance with redskin customs. They are hunters, fighters, and guides, but they are not miners, and they never go in for shares in an enterprise of this sort. It went very much against the grain for Leaping Horse to take that 300 or 400 pounds that came to him at the end of the last expedition, and he would be seriously offended if I were to press upon him more than his ordinary payment now. He would say that he has been simply hunting this year, that he has run no risks, and has had nothing to do with the mine. Tomorrow morning we will go out to see what there is in the way of horseflesh in Denver, and we'll buy him and Hunting Dog the 2 best horses in the town, whatever they may cost, with saddles, bridles, new blankets, and so on. If I can get anything special in the way of rifles, I shall get a couple of them, and if not, I shall get them in New York, and send them to him at Bridger. These are presents he would value infinitely more than all the gold we have stowed away in the bank today. He is going back to his tribe for the winter, and he and Hunting Dog will be at the mine before us next spring." In the morning Harry was 2 hours at the bank, where he saw the gold weighed out and received a receipt for the value, which came to within 100 pounds of what they had calculated, as the dust had been very carefully weighed each time it was sent off. In accordance with the arrangement he had made with Pete Hoskins and Jerry, the amount of their respective shares was placed to their credit at the bank. Drawing 1,000 pounds in cash, he received a draft for the rest upon a firm at New York, where he would be able to exchange it for one on London. He then inquired at the hotel as to who was considered to possess the best horses in the town, and as money was no object to him, he succeeded in persuading the owners to sell 2 splendid animals. These with the saddles were sent to the hotel. He then bought 2 finely finished Sharps rifles of long range, and 2 brace of silver-mounted revolvers. "Now, Tom," he said, "I shall give one of these outfits to the chief, and you give the other to Hunting Dog. He has been your special chum since we started, and the presents will come better from you than from me. I expect them here in half an hour. I told them I should be busy all the morning." The 2 Indians were delighted with their presents. even the chief being moved out of his usual impassive demeanor. "My white brothers are too good. Leaping Horse knows that Straight Harry is his friend. He does not want presents to show him that, but he will value them because he loves his white brothers, even more than for themselves." As for Hunting Dog, he was for a long time incredulous that the splendid horse, the rifle and pistols, could really be for him, and he was so exuberant in his delight that it was not until Leaping Horse frowned at him severely that he subsided into silent admiration of the gifts. "Here are papers, Chief, that you and Hunting Dog had better keep. They are the receipts for the 2 horses and 2 forms that I have had witnessed by a lawyer, saying that we have given you the horses in token of our gratitude for the services that you have rendered. Possibly you may find them useful. You may fall in with rough fellows who may make a pretense that the horses have been stolen. Oh yes, I know that you can hold your own. Still, it may avoid trouble." They had now no further use for their horses, so these were sold for a few pounds. They purchased a stock of clothes sufficient only for their journey to England. "You may as well put your revolver in your pocket, Tom," Harry said as they prepared to start the next day. "I have sewn up the draft in the lining of my coat, but sometimes a train gets held up and robbed, and as we have 600 pounds of gold and notes in our wallets, I certainly should not give it up without a fight." The Indians accompanied them to the station. "Now, Chief, you take my advice and look out for a nice wife before next spring. You're 40 now, and it is high time you thought of settling down." "Leaping Horse will think over it," the Seneca said gravely. "It may be that in the spring he will have a wigwam in the valley." A few minutes later the train started east, and 5 days later they reached New York. A steamer left the next day for England, and in this they secured 2 first-class berths, and although Tom had managed very well on his way out, he thoroughly enjoyed the vastly superior comfort of the homeward trip. They went straight through to Southampton, for, as Harry said, they could run up to London and get their clothes any day, and he saw that Tom was in a fever of excitement to get home. Harriet came to the door of the little house at Southsea when they knocked. She looked surprised at seeing 2 gentlemen standing there. In the 2 years and a half that had passed since Tom had left, he had altered greatly. He had gone through much toil and hardship, and the bronze of the previous summer sun was not yet off his cheeks. He had grown 4 or 5 inches, and the man's work that he had been doing had made almost a man of him. "Don't you know me, Harriet?" Tom said. The girl at once recognized the voice, and with a loud cry of delight threw her arms round his neck. The cry brought Carrie out from the parlor. "Why, Harriet," she exclaimed, "have you gone mad?" "Don't you see it's Tom?" Harriet said, turning round, laughing and crying together. "It is Tom, sure enough, Carrie. You need not look so incredulous. And this is Uncle Harry." There were a few minutes of wild joy. Then they calmed down and assembled in the sitting room. "It is lucky the girls have all gone home to dinner," Carrie said, "or they would certainly have carried the news to their friends that we were all mad. It is a half-holiday, too. Nothing could be more fortunate. Now we want to hear everything. Tom's letters were so short and unsatisfactory, Uncle, that he told us next to nothing, except that you had found a mine, and that you were both working there, and that it was satisfactory." "Well, my dears, that is the pith of the thing," Harry said. "The first thing for you to do is to send round notes to the mothers of these children, saying that from unforeseen circumstances you have retired from the profession, and that the school has finally closed from this afternoon." There was a general exclamation from the girls. "What do you mean, Uncle?" "I mean what I say, girls. Tom and I have made our fortunes, and there is no occasion for you to go on teaching any longer. We have not yet made any plans for the future, but at any rate the first step is that there is to be no more teaching." "But are you quite sure, Uncle?" Carrie said doubtfully. "We are getting on very nicely now, and it would be a pity to lose the connection." Harry and Tom both laughed. "Well, my girl," the former said, "that is of course a point to be thought of, but as Tom and I have over 35,000 pounds apiece, and the mine will bring us in a good round sum for some years to come, I think we can afford to run the risk of the connection going." After that, it was a long while before they settled down to talk quietly again. A week later, they all went up to London for a month, while what Harry called outfits were purchased for the girls, as well as for him and Tom, and all the sights of London visited. Before their story came to an end, the grand consultation as to future plans had been held, and a handsome house purchased at Blackheath. Tom did not return to Utah in the spring. His uncle strongly advised him not to do so. "I shall go back myself, Tom, partly because I should feel like a fish out of water with nothing to do here, partly because I promised the chief to go back for a bit every year. I am beginning to feel dull already, and am looking forward to the trip across the water, but it will certainly be better for you to stay at home. You left school early, you see, and it would be a good thing for you to get a man to come and read with you for 2 or 3 hours a day for the next year or two. We have settled that the 3 younger girls are to go to school, and I don't see why you, Carrie, and Janet should not go in the first place for 2 or 3 months on to the continent. They have had a dull life since you have been away, and the trip will be a treat for them, and perhaps you do some good also. It will be time enough to settle down to reading when you come back." The mine returned large profits that year, the increased amount stamped making up to some extent for the falling off in the value of the ore, and the shares of the various proprietors were more than half what they had been at the end of the first season's work. The third year it fell off considerably. There was a further decrease the year after, and the fifth year it barely paid its expenses, and it was decided to abandon it. Harry Wade went over every season for many years, but spent only the first at the mine. After that he went hunting expeditions with Leaping Horse, who, to his amusement, had met him at his first return to the mine with a pretty squaw, and Hunting Dog had also brought a wife with him. 2 wigwams were erected that year near the mine, but after that they returned to their tribe, of which Leaping Horse became the leading chief. Tom's sisters all in due time married, each being presented on her wedding day with a check for £10,000 as a joint present from her uncle and brother. Tom himself did not remain a bachelor, but 6 years after his return to England took a wife to himself, and the house at Blackheath was none too large for his family. Harry Wade's home is with Tom, and he is still hale and hearty. Up to the last few years he paid occasional visits to America, and stayed for a while with his red brother Leaping Horse, when they lamented together over the disappearance of game and the extinction of the buffalo. Hunting Dog had, at Harry's urgent advice, settled down in the ways of civilization, taking up a ranch and breeding cattle, of which he now owns a large herd. Jerry Curtis and Pete Hoskins made a journey together to Europe after the closing of the mine. They stayed for a month at Blackheath, and 10 years later Tom received a lawyer's letter from Denver saying that Pete Hoskins was dead, and that he had left his large house and other property in Denver to Mr. Thomas Wade's children. Jerry still lives at the age of 75 in that city. End of Chapter 19. End of In the Heart of the Rockies, A Story of Adventure in Colorado by G.A. Henty.